Tonight we will embark on a gentle journey, not to a destination, but into presence. We will explore the timeless wisdom of the Buddha, teachings that have served as a refuge for restless minds for over 2,500 years. These are not rules to follow or doctrines to memorize. They are invitations. Invitations to see differently, to soften your grip, and to uncover the deep well of peace that has been within you all along. We will walk this path through ancient stories and simple, profound truths that speak not to the busy mind, but to the quiet, knowing heart. We will learn to see our thoughts not as masters, but as passing clouds, and our difficult emotions not as enemies, but as messengers inviting us toward healing. Welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. This is your sanctuary, a space to rest your mind and nourish your spirit. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, and no one you need to become. Simply allow these words to wash over you. Before we begin, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from tonight? Please share in the comments below. If this path of quiet reflection calls to something deep within you, I invite you to subscribe to Buddha Bedtime Stories and return to this space whenever you need to remember the peace that is your birthright. These teachings are here for you, night after night, a refuge you can always return to. For now, just breathe. Let yourself settle completely. Feel the surface beneath you, holding your weight. Notice your breath moving naturally, asking nothing of you. Take a slow, deep breath in, and as you exhale, let yourself arrive here fully. Let us begin this journey together. Our journey into deep peace begins with a gentle, honest look at the nature of our own minds. It starts with one of the most foundational teachings of the Buddha. There was a devoted student named Akiko who studied with a Zen master for many years. She took meticulous notes on every teaching, every conversation, every insight that arose during her practice. Her room was filled with journals and scrolls, a massive accumulation of written wisdom that she treasured as proof of her learning. She would often review her notes, rereading old insights, checking her understanding against what she had written. The notes gave her a sense of security, a feeling that she was capturing and keeping the teachings, making sure nothing was lost. One day, her master, a woman named Mumon, came to Akiko's room and looked at the mountains of notes with a frown. "What is all this?" "My notes," Akiko said proudly. "Everything you've taught me over 5 years. Every koan we've discussed. Every meditation instruction. All preserved here." "Preserved?" Mumon repeated thoughtfully. "Like pickled vegetables?" Akiko laughed at the comparison. "Something like that. So I can return to these teachings whenever I need them." "Show me your understanding of the teaching we discussed yesterday," Mumon said. Akiko reached for her most recent journal and began reading her notes. Mumon stopped her. "Not what you wrote. Your understanding, without the notes." Akiko tried to explain the teaching from memory, but found she couldn't. Her mind kept trying to recall what she had written, rather than expressing what she actually understood. The notes had become a barrier between her and direct understanding. "You've been writing instead of learning," Mumon said gently. "You've been preserving teachings on paper, rather than absorbing them into your being. You have accumulated much, but understood little." Akiko felt defensive. but these notes help me remember. Without them, I would forget." "What you forget wasn't truly learned," Mumon replied. "And what you truly learn doesn't need notes to remember. Knowledge that lives only on paper is dead knowledge. It has to live in you to be real knowledge." She picked up one of Akiko's journals and read a passage about meditation. "Do you remember writing this?" "Yes, from 3 years ago. You were teaching about working with a restless mind." "And do you work with a restless mind this way?" Mumon asked. Akiko realized she didn't. She had written the teaching down, but never actually integrated it into her practice. The notes gave her the illusion of learning without the reality of it. Mumon set down the journal. "Tonight, I want you to burn all these notes." "What?" "No. These represent years of work. These represent years of writing. That's not the same as years of learning. Burn them. If the teachings took root in you, they'll survive the burning. If they didn't, then keeping the notes is just a way of avoiding that truth." Akiko spent a sleepless night agonizing over this instruction. Her notes felt like treasures, like her spiritual wealth accumulated over the years. But she trusted Mumon, so the next evening, she built a fire and with trembling hands began feeding her journals to the flames. As each notebook burned, she felt panic and loss, years of writing disappearing into smoke and ash. But she continued, page by page, until everything was gone. She sat looking at the ashes, feeling empty and devastated. The next morning, Mumon asked her to explain a teaching from 2 years ago. Without her notes to consult, Akiko had to reach for what she actually remembered, what had actually integrated into her understanding. She was surprised to find that she could explain the teaching, not in the exact words she had written, but in her own words that expressed real understanding. "You see," Mumon said, "what truly became part of you survived the burning. What was only on paper is gone, but it was already gone in the sense that it wasn't really yours. You possessed the notes, but you didn't possess the understanding they were meant to point toward." Over the following weeks, something shifted in Akiko's learning. Without notes to rely on, she had to actually integrate teachings as they came. She had to pay a different kind of attention, not the attention of someone recording for later, but the attention of someone learning for now. She discovered that taking notes had been a way of deferring understanding. "I'll write this down and understand it later," she would think. But later never came. The act of writing created the illusion of learning while allowing actual learning to be postponed indefinitely. Now, without that crutch, she had to understand immediately. She had to ask questions in the moment rather than writing down words to puzzle over later. She had to practice teachings directly rather than preserving them for future practice. Her understanding deepened rapidly. The teachings weren't sitting on paper waiting to be reviewed. They were living in her actions, her responses, her way of being in the world. "Why did you have me burn the notes?" Akiko asked Mumon one day. "Was it to punish me for relying on them?" "Not punishment," Mumon replied. "Liberation. You were carrying a library but not living the teachings. The notes made you feel like a good student, like you were capturing and preserving wisdom. But actually, they were preventing you from being transformed by that wisdom. You were collecting teachings like butterflies in a jar, beautiful but dead, instead of learning to fly." She looked at Akiko directly. The teachings aren't meant to be possessed. They're meant to be embodied. You can't embody something while you're busy writing it down and filing it away. The burning freed you from the illusion that learning means accumulating words on paper. A fellow student who still took extensive notes heard about Akiko's burned journals and was horrified. How can you not take notes? How will you remember everything? I don't remember everything, Akiko admitted. I remember what matters. What doesn't stick naturally wasn't ready to be integrated anyway. Before, I had notes on hundreds of teachings I didn't understand or practice. Now I have no notes, but I actually live the teachings that have taken root. The other student wasn't convinced, but months later came back to Akiko. I've been thinking about what you said. I realized I hide behind my notes. I write things down instead of changing my behavior. I accumulate teachings instead of applying them. Maybe I need to burn my notes too. Maybe, Akiko said. Or maybe you just need to recognize that the notes are a tool, not the goal. They can serve learning if you use them as temporary scaffolding that you eventually remove. But if you treat them as the achievement itself, they become obstacles. Years later, when Akiko became a teacher herself, she had an unusual policy. Students could take notes during the teachings, but at the end of each month, they had to burn them. If you understood, you don't need the notes, she would tell them. If you didn't understand, the notes won't help you. They'll just give you the illusion of understanding, while the real thing eludes you. Some students resisted this practice. But what if I forget important things? Then they weren't that important, Akiko would reply, or they weren't meant for you at this time. Trust that what you need to remember will stay with you. Trust that understanding that matters will integrate naturally. Let go of trying to capture and possess teachings. Let them flow through you, keeping what sticks and releasing what doesn't. One student said, "But I learn by writing. The act of writing helps me process and remember." Then write, Akiko allowed. But burn your notes afterward. Let writing be a process of learning, not a product of learning. Let it be the act of digestion, not the attempt at preservation. Write to understand in the moment, not to have something to refer back to. She showed them her empty shelves where journals used to be. I'm lighter now. I carry less paper, but more understanding. The teachings live in how I respond to difficulty, how I meet each moment, and how I treat people. They don't live in notes tucked away in storage. This is the difference between dead knowledge and living wisdom. Tonight, as you rest, what notes are you clinging to? What accumulations of knowledge or experience are you treating as possessions rather than processes? What have you written down, filed away, or tucked into memory, with the intention of understanding later, but later never comes? You don't need to keep everything. You don't need to preserve every insight, remember every lesson, or capture every moment of learning. What truly transforms you doesn't need notes to survive. It lives in you, changes you, and becomes part of how you move through the world. Rest now in the understanding that learning isn't about accumulation, but about integration. That wisdom lives not on shelves, but in actions. The most important teachings don't need to be written down because they write themselves into your very being. Let yourself be like the burned journals, emptied of words but full of understanding, lighter in paper but heavier in wisdom, possessing less but being more. The notes were never the point. The understanding they pointed toward was the point. And that understanding needs no paper to live on. It lives in you. It always has. Rest now in that living wisdom, requiring no notes, no preservation, no recording. Just being, knowing, understanding from the inside out. There was a master calligrapher named Kenzo who had spent 40 years perfecting his craft. He could write each character with flawless precision, every stroke exactly as the ancient masters had prescribed. His work was technically perfect, exhibited in galleries, and purchased by collectors who valued his adherence to classical standards. But Kenzo had a secret dissatisfaction. Despite the praise and recognition, his work felt lifeless to him. Each piece was an exercise in replication, a demonstration of technique, but nothing more. He was copying perfection that had been established centuries ago, adding nothing of himself, discovering nothing new. One day, an important patron commissioned a piece for a temple dedication. The character to be written was Mu, meaning emptiness or void. Kenzo prepared carefully, mixing his ink to exactly the right consistency, selecting his finest brush, and setting up his workspace with meticulous attention to every detail. He had practiced this character thousands of times. He knew exactly how it should look. He visualized every stroke in his mind, preparing to execute it perfectly. But as he positioned his brush above the paper, his cat, who normally slept quietly in the corner during his work, suddenly leapt onto the table. The cat's paw hit Kenzo's arm just as he was beginning the first stroke. The brush dragged across the paper in a completely unintended direction, creating a wild, irregular mark that bore no resemblance to proper calligraphy. Kenzo's first reaction was anger. The perfect paper was ruined. Hours of preparation wasted. He would have to start over, and he was already behind schedule. He grabbed the ruined piece, intending to crumple it and throw it away, but something made him pause. He looked at the mark more carefully. The stroke was wild, yes, completely improper by classical standards. But it had an energy, a life, a spontaneous quality that none of his careful, perfect strokes ever achieved. It looked like emptiness, like void, like the very essence of Mu, in a way his technically correct versions never had. The mark captured something real about emptiness, its unpredictability, its resistance to control, its indifference to our intentions. His planned perfect versions had been illustrations of the concept. This accidental mark was somehow the thing itself. Kenzo sat staring at this mistake for over an hour. Finally, he decided to build the rest of the character around it, incorporating the wild stroke instead of starting over. The final piece was unlike anything he had ever created. It combined his technical skill with this element of pure accident, planned mastery with unplanned spontaneity. When he delivered the piece to his patron, he apologized. "I must confess, this isn't what I planned." My cat interfered, and the first stroke went completely wrong. I tried to salvage the piece, but it's not traditional calligraphy. I understand if you want me to create a new one. The patron studied the work in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "This is the finest piece you've ever created." "But it's wrong," Kenzo protested. "The first stroke violates every principle of proper form." It's alive, the patron replied. Your other work is beautiful, technically flawless, but it's like looking at a preserved flower. This piece is like seeing a flower growing wild. It has breath in it, spontaneity, the quality of something happening right now rather than being carefully reconstructed from the past. He hung the piece in the temple, and people came from across the region to see it. Other calligraphers studied it, trying to understand how Kenzo had achieved such vitality. Some tried to recreate the effect by deliberately making mistakes, but these forced accidents never had the same quality. The life in Kenzo's piece came from the genuineness of the accident, not from calculated imperfection. A Zen master who viewed the piece said to Kenzo, "Your cat understood something you had forgotten, that true art comes from responding to the moment, not from executing a plan. For 40 years, you've been copying the past. In one moment of accident, you created something present." "But I can't plan accidents," Kenzo said. "I can't make this happen deliberately." "Exactly," the master replied. "That's why it worked. Your planning mind, your control, your perfection, all of that had to be interrupted for something real to emerge. The cat was your teacher." From that day forward, Kenzo's approach to calligraphy changed. He still practiced technique, still maintained his skills, but he stopped trying to control every aspect of the outcome. He began leaving space for accident, for the unexpected, for the moment to contribute its own wisdom. Sometimes he would start a piece without complete preparation, letting the consistency of the ink vary, allowing the paper to be slightly wrinkled, welcoming small imperfections. Sometimes he would work faster than was comfortable, not giving himself time to calculate every movement. Sometimes he would deliberately do something unusual, breaking a rule to see what would happen. Not every piece succeeded. Many experiments failed, but the successful pieces had a quality his earlier perfect work had lacked: presence, immediacy, life. They felt like they were happening rather than being displayed. They invited the viewer into an experience rather than presenting a completed achievement. Other calligraphers criticized this departure from classical standards. Kenzo has abandoned proper technique, they said. He's making mistakes deliberately. This isn't true calligraphy. But Kenzo understood something they didn't. Technique wasn't being abandoned. It was being liberated. He had spent 40 years building technical mastery. Now he was learning what to do with that mastery, not to control and perfect, but to create conditions where truth could emerge spontaneously. The technique serves spontaneity, he would tell students. You practice until the movements are natural, until you don't have to think about them. Then you let go of trying to be perfect and allow something real to happen. The years of practice give you the skills. The letting go gives you the art. One student asked, "But how do you know when to let go? How do you know when you've practiced enough?" "You don't," Kenzo admitted. "I practiced for 40 years before my cat taught me to let go. Maybe that was too long. Maybe it wasn't long enough. The point isn't reaching some perfect amount of preparation. The point is remaining open to the moment when control needs to give way to spontaneity." He showed the student his temple piece with its wild first stroke. "I could never recreate this exactly. I could make similar pieces, but this particular mark came from this particular moment of accident. That's what makes it true." It's not a reproducible technique. It's a response to what actually happened. Years later, when Kenzo was old, he was asked to demonstrate calligraphy for the emperor. It was considered a great honor. Most calligraphers prepared extensively for such occasions, practicing for weeks to ensure a perfect demonstration. Kenzo prepared differently. He practiced just enough to be warmed up, then went to the demonstration with no fixed plan. He would respond to the moment, to the energy in the room, to whatever impulse arose. It was terrifying and exhilarating. As he stood before the emperor with brush and paper, he felt all his years of perfect control wanting to take over. The safe thing would be to execute a flawless classical piece. But instead, he paused, breathed, and let go of control. What emerged was neither perfectly planned nor completely accidental. It was something in between, technique meeting moment, skill dancing with spontaneity, the practiced hand responding to the unpracticed impulse. The character he created had both mastery and wildness, both tradition and innovation. When he finished, the emperor was silent for a moment, then said, "I have seen many demonstrations of perfect technique. This is the first time I've seen calligraphy that felt alive. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider where you're over-controlling, over-planning, and trying to perfect everything before you act. What would happen if you made space for accident, for spontaneity, for the moment to contribute its own wisdom? What if your careful plans are actually preventing something more true from emerging?" The perfect mistake teaches that life isn't lived according to plan. The most authentic moments come when planning gives way to presence, when control releases into response, when the prepared hand meets the unprepared moment. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need perfect execution. You need technique in the service of spontaneity, skill as a foundation for letting go. Rest now in the space between planning and accident, between control and release. Let yourself be like Kenzo's brush, prepared by practice, but freed from the need to be perfect. Tomorrow might bring a cat leaping onto your carefully prepared plans. Let it. The interruption might be the teacher. The accident might be the truth. The mistake might be perfect. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In a village known for its textiles, there lived a master weaver named Hana, whose tapestries were sought after throughout the region. Her work was meticulous, each thread placed with precision, each pattern executed exactly as planned. She would design a piece completely in her mind before beginning, then weave it exactly as envisioned, allowing no deviation from her original plan. One day, Hana was working on her most ambitious piece yet, a large tapestry commissioned by a wealthy patron. She had been weaving for 3 weeks, and the pattern was emerging beautifully, exactly as she had planned it. The colors flowed in perfect harmony, the design unfolding with mathematical precision. Then disaster struck. As she reached for a spool of thread, her elbow knocked over a cup of tea. The liquid spilled across her loom, soaking into the partially completed tapestry and breaking several threads. Hana stared at the damage in horror. Weeks of work, ruined. The pattern disrupted. The threads broken in places she hadn't planned. Her carefully designed vision destroyed by one careless moment. Her first impulse was to tear it all down and start over. But the patron needed the piece in 2 weeks, and starting over would make meeting the deadline impossible. She would have to work with the damaged tapestry somehow. For a full day, Hannah sat before the loom, paralyzed by frustration and disappointment. She kept seeing the tapestry as it should have been, comparing it to the broken reality before her. Every time she looked at the damaged sections, she felt her failure. Finally, her grandmother, who had taught Hannah to weave, came to visit. The old woman looked at the damaged tapestry for a long time, saying nothing. "It's ruined," Hannah said miserably. "All my planning, all my vision, destroyed." Her grandmother touched one of the broken threads gently. "Or changed," she said. "Ruined and changed are not the same thing." "But it's not what I planned. The pattern is broken." "Then make a new pattern," her grandmother said simply. "One that includes the break. Use the interruption as part of the design rather than fighting against it." Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that the original plan was the only right way. But she looked at her grandmother's eyes, which had seen 70 years of life's interruptions and changes, and stayed quiet. "When I was your age," her grandmother said, settling into a chair, "I believed that good weaving meant perfect execution of a predetermined plan. Any deviation was failure. Any interruption was disaster. I would throw away pieces that didn't match my vision, even if they were beautiful in their own way." She smiled, remembering. "Then one year, I was weaving a ceremonial cloth for a temple. I had planned an elaborate pattern of lotus flowers, but halfway through, I became very ill. I couldn't work for 2 months. When I finally returned to the loom, I had forgotten exactly what I'd planned. My hands had changed from the illness. My eyes saw colors slightly differently. I couldn't recreate my original vision even if I tried." "What did you do?" Hannah asked. "I wept at first," her grandmother admitted. "I felt like I had failed. But then I started weaving again, not trying to force my memory of the original plan, but responding to what was actually there on the loom. Where I had forgotten the exact pattern, I improvised. Where my hands moved differently, I let them. Where my changed eyes saw colors differently, I trusted them." She leaned forward, and you know what? That piece became the most celebrated work I ever created. People still talk about it. They say it has a quality that my other work doesn't have, a kind of depth and authenticity. Because it wasn't just my plan executed perfectly. It was my plan interrupted by life, changed by circumstance, transformed by letting go of control. Hannah looked at her damaged tapestry with new eyes. What if she stopped seeing it as her failed plan and started seeing it as an opportunity? What if the broken threads weren't mistakes but invitations to create something she never would have imagined? She began to weave again, but differently. Where threads were broken, she wove in new colors, creating unexpected contrasts. Where the pattern was interrupted, she let it flow in new directions. Where tea stains had discolored sections, she added complementary shades that made the stains look intentional, like watercolor washes. The work became a dialogue between her original plan and the accidents that had interrupted it. She found herself excited by this conversation, by the surprise of not knowing exactly what would emerge, by the creativity required to work with interruption rather than against it. 2 weeks later, when she delivered the finished tapestry to the patron, she held her breath. It was not what she had promised. It was not what anyone had expected. The patron stared at it for a long time. Hannah prepared herself for disappointment, perhaps even for the commission to be rejected. Then the patron turned to her with tears in his eyes. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. There's something alive about it, something that speaks of real life rather than perfect planning. This pattern here, these unexpected color changes, this flow that seems both intentional and spontaneous. How did you create this?" Hannah told him the truth about the spilled tea, the broken threads, the ruined plan, the choice to work with the damage rather than starting over. The patron listened and nodded slowly. "So this beauty came from accident and interruption, from things going wrong." "From embracing what went wrong," Hannah clarified. "From letting the interruption become part of the design rather than the enemy of it." The patron hung the tapestry in the place of highest honor in his home. People came from distant cities to see it. They would stand before it and feel something they couldn't quite name, a quality of authenticity that perfectly planned and executed works somehow lacked. Hannah's approach to weaving changed after that. She still planned her pieces, still brought skill and intention to her work, but she no longer demanded that reality conform perfectly to her plans. When threads broke, when colors ran differently than expected, when her hands moved in ways she hadn't intended, she learned to see these interruptions as collaborators rather than enemies. Her later work was marked by this quality of collaboration with accident. She became known for tapestries that felt alive, that contained both intention and surprise, that spoke of a weaver who had learned to dance with interruption rather than fight against it. When students came to learn from her, she would tell them the story of the spilled tea and the broken threads. "Life will interrupt your plans," she would say. "This is not a problem to solve, but a truth to accept." The question is not how to prevent interruption, but how to weave it into the pattern, how to let it teach you, change you, take you places your plan never would have gone. She would show them her most celebrated piece, the one born from disaster. "This taught me that my plans are not sacred. They're just starting points. What emerges when plan meets reality, when intention meets accident, when control meets surrender, that's where the real art lives. Not in perfect execution of a predetermined vision, but in the creative response to all the ways reality refuses to conform to our vision." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider how life has interrupted your plans, the ways things haven't gone as you envisioned, the broken threads in your own tapestry. Are you still fighting against these interruptions, trying to force reality back to your original plan? Or can you begin to weave them into a new pattern, one you never would have imagined, but that might be more beautiful, more authentic, more true than your original vision? Your life is not a failed plan. It's a collaborative creation between your intentions and reality's interruptions. And sometimes the interruptions are the best parts, the threads of color you never would have chosen, but that make the whole piece come alive. Rest now in acceptance of all the broken threads, all the spilled tea, all the ways your carefully laid plans have been disrupted. These are not failures. They're invitations to create something new, something real. Something that could only emerge from the collaboration between what you intended and what actually happened. At the edge of a village stood a house whose small garden received almost no direct sunlight. Tall buildings on either side cast shadows that leave the garden in shade for all but an hour each day. The previous owners had tried repeatedly to grow sun-loving flowers and vegetables, but everything either died or grew weak and spindly, stretching desperately toward the brief sliver of light. When Yuki moved into the house, neighbors warned her about the garden. "Nothing grows there," they said. "The shade is too deep. Better to pave it over and use it for storage." But Yuki looked at the shaded space differently. "It's not that nothing can grow here," she said. "It's that sun-loving plants can't grow here. The garden isn't bad. It's just suited for different things than the previous owners were trying to grow." She began researching plants that thrived in shade, ferns that loved the dim moisture, hostas with broad leaves that caught what little light appeared, shade-loving flowers that bloomed in muted colors, but with delicate beauty. Instead of fighting the garden's nature, she worked with it. Within a year, Yuki's shaded garden was lush and beautiful. It didn't look like sunny gardens with their bright flowers and robust vegetables. It had a different aesthetic, subtle, cool, mysterious. The greens were deeper, the flowers were more delicate. The whole space had a quality of quiet richness that sun-blasted gardens never achieved. Neighbors who had declared the space hopeless came to see what Yuki had created. They were amazed, though some were still dismissive. "It's pretty," one neighbor said, "but it's not a real garden. Real gardens have tomatoes and sunflowers and bright colors. Your garden is just making the best of bad conditions." "Are it conditions bad?" Yuki asked. "Or just different conditions?" "These ferns and hostas are barely surviving. They're thriving. They're doing exactly what they evolved to do in exactly the kind of environment they need. The previous owners failed because they tried to grow sun plants in shade. I'm succeeding because I'm growing shade plants in shade." She touched a particularly lush fern. "This plant would die in full sun. It needs shade. For this fern, my garden isn't difficult conditions, it's ideal conditions. The mistake is measuring all gardens by sun garden standards and calling everything else deficient." A young woman named Hannah, who lived nearby, was struck by this perspective. Hannah had always felt like she was growing in the shade in difficult circumstances that made the kind of success others achieved impossible for her. She had health issues that limited her energy. She lived in poverty, which restricted her opportunities. She lacked the family support that others took for granted. Everyone told her she needed to overcome these limitations, to find more light, to transform her difficult conditions into easier ones. But what if, like Yuki's garden, she just needed to stop trying to grow like a sun plant and instead discover how to thrive as a shade plant? She came to talk with Yuki about this idea. "I feel like I'm always failing," Hannah admitted, "because I can't achieve what healthy, wealthy people with family support achieve. I'm trying to grow tomatoes in shade, basically. But I don't know what the equivalent of shade plants would be for a human life." Yuki walked her through the garden, explaining her choices. "See how I chose plants that need less energy? That's like you choosing work that fits your energy levels rather than jobs that demand more than you can give. See how I selected plants that thrive in cool, moist conditions? That's like you finding strengths that develop specifically because of your limitations, not despite them. She pointed to a particularly beautiful shade flower. This would never survive in full sun. Its delicate petals would burn. But here, protected from harsh light, it blooms with a beauty that sun lovers can't achieve. Your limitations might protect you from certain kinds of harm while allowing you to develop qualities that people in easier conditions never develop. Hana began to reconsider her entire life. What if she stopped measuring herself by sun garden standards? What if she found shade garden ways to thrive? She had deep empathy, probably developed through her own suffering. She had patience, learned through chronic illness. She had creativity in making do with little, born from poverty. These weren't consolation prizes for failing at normal success. These were actual strengths, shade plant qualities that were valuable in themselves. She started making different choices. She took a job that paid less, but required less energy, allowing her to work sustainably rather than constantly burning out. She developed friendships with others who lived in shade, creating community with people who understood difficult circumstances. She stopped apologizing for needing things that others didn't need, recognizing that shade plants legitimately need different care than sun plants. Word spread about Yuki's garden and the perspective it represented. People who felt they were growing in difficult conditions began to see themselves differently. A man with learning disabilities stopped trying to compete in academic environments and found work that used his practical intelligence. A woman with anxiety stopped forcing herself into high-stress social situations and built a life that honored her need for quiet. A family with limited income stopped feeling inadequate for not achieving wealth and found richness in their strong relationships. The shade garden teaching, as people began to call it, spread beyond individuals to organizations. A school started creating shade garden programs for students who couldn't thrive in standard classroom environments. A business developed positions specifically designed for people with limitations that made traditional jobs difficult. A community center created spaces for people who needed accommodations that mainstream spaces didn't provide. Not everyone appreciated this perspective. Some critics said it encouraged people to accept limitations rather than overcoming them. You're telling people to give up, they argued, to accept that they can't thrive in normal conditions rather than working to change their circumstances. Yuki would answer these critics by walking them through her garden. Look at these plants. Should they be working to become sun plants? Should they be trying to overcome their shade-thriving nature? Or should they be celebrated for being excellent at what they actually are? She would point to a struggling plant that needed more light. Sometimes you do need to change conditions. This plant is genuinely in the wrong place. It needs to be moved to a more light-filled place. But most of these plants, they're exactly where they should be, thriving in conditions that sun plants would call impossible. The question isn't whether to overcome all limitations. The question is whether your limitations are like shade for a shade plant, the right conditions for your actual nature, or like shade for a sun plant, wrong conditions that need to change. A teacher named Nobuo applied this to his classroom. He stopped trying to make all students thrive in the same way. He recognized that some students were sun plants who needed bright, fast-paced, competitive environments. Others were shade plants that needed quiet, slow, supportive conditions. Trying to make shade plant students compete in sun plant ways was as futile as trying to grow ferns in full sun. He created different pathways through his curriculum, different ways to demonstrate learning, and different environments within his classroom. And he found that students he had previously considered struggling were actually thriving. They just needed shade garden conditions to show what they could do. Years later, Yuki's garden became something of a pilgrimage site for people living in difficult circumstances. They would come to see that lushness was possible even in shade, that beauty didn't require ideal conditions, that thriving could look different from what sunny gardens showed. Yuki, now elderly, would sit in her garden talking with visitors. The hardest thing, she would tell them, is stopping comparing yourself to sun gardens. Stop measuring your lushness by their standards. Stop trying to be bright when your beauty is subtle. Once you accept that you're a shade garden, once you stop apologizing for it and start working with it, you discover possibilities you never knew existed. She would touch the ferns and hostas she had planted decades earlier, now mature and magnificent. These plants are barely surviving in bad conditions. They're thriving in ideal conditions for their nature. The shade isn't their obstacle, it's their element. And the same might be true for you. Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider the shade you're growing in. The difficult conditions you've been taught to see as obstacles might actually be the right environment for who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who sun gardens demand, but who you actually are. Stop trying to grow sun plants in shade. Stop measuring yourself by standards designed for different conditions. Start asking, what does thriving look like for a shade plant? What can I grow that loves these exact conditions? What beauty can emerge specifically because of these limitations, not despite them? Rest now in your shade garden. Let yourself be a fern, a hosta, a delicate shade flower. Stop burning yourself trying to bloom in full sun. Sink into the cool moisture of your actual conditions and discover what wants to grow there. Shade isn't a deficiency. It's just a different light. And different light creates different beauty. Trust that yours is worth growing. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a coastal city, there lived a renowned mapmaker named Genji, who had charted more territory than any cartographer of his generation. His maps were detailed, accurate, and highly sought after by merchants, explorers, and military leaders. Every island, every coastline, every mountain range he documented was rendered with precision. But Genji had a practice that other mapmakers mocked. Whenever his knowledge ended, whenever he reached the limits of what had been explored and documented, he would leave the map blank. Large white spaces appeared on his charts, marked only with the words "unknown territory," or sometimes just left empty. Other mapmakers found this approach unprofessional. They would fill in the blank spaces with speculation, with reports from unreliable sources, with educated guesses. A map should be complete, they would argue. Blank spaces make it look unfinished. Blank spaces are honest, Genji would reply. They tell the truth, that we don't know what's there. Filling them with guesses tells a lie, that we do know. But the criticism stung, especially when clients would choose other mapmakers' complete maps over Genji's honest but incomplete ones. People wanted certainty, even false certainty. They wanted maps that told them what lay everywhere, even if those maps were partly fiction. One season, a wealthy merchant named Ichiro commissioned Genji to create a map for a trading expedition to distant islands. When Genji delivered the map, Ichiro was dismayed by the large blank areas. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Ichiro complained. "I need to know what's in these blank spaces. I need to plan my route." "What's in those spaces is unknown," Genji replied. "No reliable expedition has charted them. I can't tell you what I don't know." "But other mapmakers have filled in these areas," Ichiro protested. "They show islands, harbors, channels." "Based on speculation," Genji said. "Based on second-hand rumors and wishful thinking. If you sail using those maps, you'll be navigating by fantasy. My blank spaces at least tell you where certainty ends." Ichiro hired a different map maker who provided a complete map with no blank spaces. The expedition set sail using this fully detailed chart, confident in their route. 3 months later, the expedition returned, having lost 2 ships. They had found islands where the map showed open ocean, encountered reefs where the map showed safe passage, and wasted weeks exploring channels that didn't exist. The complete map had been worse than useless. It had been dangerous. Ichiro returned to Genji, chastened. "Your blank spaces would have saved lives. If I had known we were entering unknown territory, I would have proceeded cautiously. Instead, I trusted a map that pretended to know, and that false certainty led to disaster." "Blank spaces scare people," Genji acknowledged. "They remind us how much we don't know, how limited our understanding is. But pretending we know more than we do is worse than admitting our ignorance. The blank space says, 'Be careful here. Proceed thoughtfully. Don't assume.' The falsely filled space says, 'It's safe to trust this,' which is a dangerous lie." Word spread about Ichiro's disaster and Genji's honest maps. More clients began to value the blank spaces, recognizing them as marks of integrity rather than incompleteness. They learned to read Genji's maps differently. The detailed areas showed where knowledge was reliable. The blank areas showed where caution was needed. A young apprentice named Lin came to study with Genji. She had been trained by other map makers who filled in all spaces, and she struggled with Genji's insistence on leaving blanks. "But we can make educated guesses," Lin argued. "We know the general geography of the region. We can estimate where islands are likely to be." "And we'd be wrong half the time," Genji replied. "An educated guess isn't knowledge. It's speculation with a fancy name. If you mark speculation as if it's fact, you're lying to whoever uses your map." He spread out several maps on his table, his own with its blank spaces, and competitors' maps of the same regions with every space filled. These complete maps look more professional, more finished. But which is more honest? Which better serves someone trusting their life to the information? Lin began to understand, but still she resisted. People don't want to be told we don't know. They want answers, even imperfect ones. Then they want comforting lies rather than uncomfortable truths, Genji said. And it's not our job to provide comforting lies. Our job is to chart what's known and clearly mark what's not. The blank space is information. It tells you something important. Here be dragons, or at least here be unknowns. Proceed carefully. Over time, Lynn learned to value the blank spaces. She discovered that leaving areas blank required as much skill as filling them in. You had to know exactly where certainty ended, had to resist the temptation to extend your knowledge beyond its actual limits, and had to be comfortable with admitting you didn't have all the answers. One day, an explorer returned from a region Genji had left blank on his maps. The explorer had detailed charts of what was actually there. Your blank space wasn't really blank, the explorer said, showing Genji islands and coastlines that had been unknown before. Now it's not blank, Genji agreed, carefully adding the new information to his map. But it was blank until you explored it. That's how honest maps work. They grow as knowledge grows, but they never pretend to knowledge we don't have. He looked at the transformed map. See how the blank space has been replaced with detail. That's how it should happen. First honest acknowledgement of ignorance, then actual exploration, then knowledge replacing the unknown. But some map makers skip the first step and go straight to filling in spaces with imagination, which prevents anyone from recognizing what actually needs to be explored. Years later, Genji's blank spaces became the very thing that made his maps valuable. Explorers would deliberately seek out the blank spaces on Genji's maps, knowing these marked genuinely unexplored territory rather than cartographic guesswork. Military leaders trusted Genji's maps precisely because they showed where trust should end. A historian interviewing Genji late in his life asked, "Don't the blank spaces bother you? Don't you wish you could fill in all the unknown areas before you die?" "No," Genji replied without hesitation. "The blank spaces are the most honest things on my maps. They say, 'I don't know,' which is often the truest thing a person can say. I could fill them with speculation and fantasy, making maps that look complete. But I'd rather make true maps." He gestured to his life's work, hundreds of maps, all marked with careful detail where knowledge existed and honest blankness where it didn't. These blank spaces are my legacy. They're me admitting the limits of my knowledge, refusing to pretend omniscience, valuing truth over completeness. Every mapmaker who fills in the unknown with guesses is choosing ego over integrity. I choose integrity. The historian looked at a particularly large blank space on one map. Will this ever be filled in? Perhaps, Genji said. Perhaps someone will explore that region and bring back reliable information, or perhaps it will remain blank forever. Either way, my map is honest right now, which is all any map can be. The map maker who fills in that space with speculation is making a map that's dishonest right now, in the hope that by accident he might be correct later. That's not map making. That's gambling. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider the blank spaces in your own understanding. Where are you filling in unknowns with speculation, pretending certainty you don't have, telling yourself and others you know things you actually don't? What would it mean to leave those spaces blank, to honestly mark them as unknown? The blank space isn't a failure. It's honesty. It's saying, "I don't know," instead of offering false certainty. It's admitting the limits of your understanding rather than pretending those limits don't exist. This feels vulnerable because we're taught that certainty is strength and uncertainty is weakness. But actually, false certainty is weakness disguised as strength, while honest uncertainty is strength willing to show itself. Rest now in your blank spaces. Let yourself not know what you don't know. Let yourself mark large areas of your life, your future, your understanding as unknown territory. This isn't an admission of failure, it's commitment to truth. The mapmaker with blank spaces serves better than the one with false completeness. So do you. Your honest "I don't know" is more valuable than anyone's false "I'm certain." Sleep in the blank spaces tonight where truth lives. There was a painter named Hero who specialized in landscapes, particularly sunsets. He would travel to scenic locations, set up his easel, and capture the magnificent colors of the evening sky. His paintings were admired and purchased by wealthy collectors throughout the region, but Hero harbored a secret anxiety. He worried that beauty only existed when someone was there to witness it. If a sunset occurred and no one saw it, was it still beautiful? If a mountain stood in perfect light, but no human eye appreciated it, did that beauty mean anything? This philosophical worry grew into an obsession. Hero began to feel that his purpose as an artist was essential, that without him and others like him to witness and record beauty, that beauty was somehow wasted, meaningless, lost. He expressed this concern to a Zen monk named Daigu, who lived near one of Hero's favorite painting locations. If I didn't come here to paint these sunsets, they would just happen and disappear with no one to appreciate them. Doesn't that seem like a waste? Daigu looked at Hero with gentle amusement. Let me ask you something. Before humans existed, before there were any conscious beings to witness them, did sunsets occur? Yes, I suppose so. And were they beautiful? How could they be beautiful if there was no one to see them? Ah, Daigu said. So you believe beauty is created by the observer rather than existing in the observed? This question troubled Hero. He had always thought beauty was a quality inherent in things, but maybe he was wrong. Maybe beauty was just a human interpretation, a meaning we project onto neutral phenomena. Daigu continued, Tonight, stay at my temple. In the morning, before dawn, I'll show you something. That night, Hero could barely sleep, wondering what the monk would show him. Before sunrise, Daigu woke him and led him to a secluded valley far from any human habitation. We're going to leave now, Daigu said, and we're not going to look back. This evening, the sunset will occur here, with no human to witness it. According to your theory, that sunset will not be beautiful because there's no one to appreciate it. But how will we know? Hero asked. Exactly, Daigu smiled. How will we know? And does not knowing change anything about what actually happens? They left the valley and returned to the temple. All day, Hero thought about the sunset occurring in that empty valley. The sky is going through its evening transformation with no human eye to see it. Colors blooming and fading with no one to call them beautiful. That evening, sitting with Daigu as the sun set over the temple, Hero said, Right now, in that valley, the sunset is happening. And it's the same sky, the same light, the same colors as here. The only difference is, we're not there to see it. And? Daigu prompted. and I realize my presence doesn't create the beauty. It just allows me to participate in it. The sunset doesn't need me to witness it to be what it is. My witnessing is a gift I receive, not a gift I give to the sunset. Daigu nodded. The mountains were beautiful before humans arrived and will be beautiful after humans are gone. The sunset performs its daily miracle whether anyone watches or not. Beauty is not dependent on observers. It exists. Our observation of it is our privilege, not our creation or our responsibility. This understanding transformed Hiro's relationship with his art. He had been painting with a sense of urgent mission, as if he needed to capture and preserve beauty before it was lost to obscurity. Now, he painted with gratitude, recognizing that he was participating in beauty, not rescuing it. His paintings changed. They became less about controlling and capturing, and more about celebrating and sharing. Critics said his later work had a quality of joy that his earlier, technically superior work had lacked. One student asked Hiro, "If beauty exists without observers, why paint at all? Why bother witnessing it?" "Because witnessing is a joy," Hiro replied, "not a duty. I don't paint because the sunset needs me. I paint because I need the sunset. Being present to beauty enriches me. Sharing that experience with others through my paintings is a gift I offer, but the beauty itself doesn't depend on my offering. It simply is." He told the student about the sunset in the empty valley. Somewhere right now, a magnificent sunset is occurring that no human will ever see. No photograph will capture it. No painting will record it. It will happen and end and be gone forever from human knowledge. And that's perfect. That sunset doesn't exist for us. It exists because the earth turns and light bends and atmosphere scatters color. We're fortunate when we get to witness it, but our witnessing isn't required. This lesson extended beyond sunsets to everything in Hiro's life. He realized he'd been placing himself at the center of existence, as if things needed him to matter. But actually, everything had its own existence, its own worth, independent of his awareness or appreciation. The tree in his garden was a tree whether he noticed it or not. The bird singing in the morning was completing its nature whether he heard it or not. The stars were shining whether he looked up at them or not. His presence as an observer was optional, not essential. Everything existed quite fully without him. "This could feel depressing," he told Daigu later. "Realizing that I'm not essential, that everything would continue without me." "Or it could feel liberating," Daigu replied. "You don't have to carry the burden of making things matter. They already matter. Your role is simply to participate, to witness, to celebrate when you're fortunate enough to be present." This is a much lighter burden than thinking you must observe everything to validate its existence. Years later, when Hiro was old and knew he was dying, a young painter came to him, worried. "When I die, who will paint these mountains? Who will witness these sunsets? Will all this beauty be wasted?" Hiro smiled, remembering his own younger anxieties. "The beauty will be what it has always been, complete and independent of observers. Other people will witness it. And even if no people witnessed it, it would still be itself, still be beautiful in its own right. You're not the author of beauty. You're just a fortunate participant in it. Paint while you can, witness what you're able to, and rest easy knowing that beauty doesn't depend on you to exist." Tonight, as you rest, You might find relief in this teaching. The world doesn't need you to be constantly observing, appreciating, and validating it for it to have worth. Your life has value. Your presence matters, but not because everything depends on you. Rather, because you get to participate in existence, to witness beauty, to experience being alive. This moment, right now, is happening whether you're paying attention or not. The universe is unfolding whether you're conscious of it or not. You can rest completely, releasing all concern that you need to be witnessing and validating and appreciating every moment. Some moments will happen without you. Some beauty will bloom and fade unseen. And that's perfect. That's how it should be. Rest in the understanding that you're not the center of existence, but a participant in it, a grateful guest, not a required audience. Let the world exist without your constant attention. Let beauty be beautiful, whether you're watching or not. This is freedom. This is peace. This is the deep rest of knowing you can stop, can close your eyes, can let go completely, and everything will continue being exactly what it is. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. There was a fisherman named Sato who lived in a coastal village where fishing was both a livelihood and a tradition. Every morning the fishermen would go out in their boats, and every evening they would return with their catches. The measure of a good fisherman was simple. How many fish did you catch? Sato had been fishing since childhood. He knew the waters, understood the tides, and could read the weather. But despite all his skill and knowledge, he had a problem that plagued him. At least once a week, sometimes more, he would return with an empty net. Not a small catch, not a few fish, empty. Other fishermen would return with boats full of fish, and Sato would be pulling up nets that contained nothing but seaweed and water. It was humiliating. People in the village began to see him as unlucky, perhaps even incompetent, despite his years of experience. Sato's wife, Hana, watched her husband grow increasingly frustrated and ashamed. He would come home from these empty net days silent and dejected, barely eating, questioning his worth as a fisherman and as a provider. One day, after a particularly discouraging week where Sato had returned empty-handed 3 times, Hana said something unexpected. "I'm glad you caught no fish today." Sato looked at her in disbelief. "How can you say that?" "We need the income. The other fishermen are successful. I'm failing." "Come with me," Hana said, taking his hand. She led him to the small shrine at the edge of their property, where they would leave offerings for good fortune. On the offering plate were several small items: 3 unusual shells, a piece of interesting driftwood, a small colored stone. "Where did these come from?" Sato asked. "From your empty nets," Hana replied. "On the days when you caught no fish, you brought home these things instead. You were so focused on what you didn't catch that you never looked at what you did bring back." She picked up one of the shells. "This one you brought back 2 weeks ago. I'd never seen a shell like this before. I showed it to the teacher at the school, and she used it to teach the children about sea life. Those children learned something beautiful from your empty net." She picked up the driftwood. "This piece is so interesting in shape that the temple carver asked if he could use it for a small Buddha statue." Your failure brought something that will become sacred art. Sato looked at these objects with new eyes. He had indeed pulled them from his nets on empty days, but he had seen them as worthless, just debris that mocked him by taking the place of fish. "But we can't eat shells and driftwood," he protested. "We need fish to sell." "We need some fish," Hana agreed, "and you catch enough on your successful days. But these empty net days bring other things, things with value that can't be measured in money, and they bring something else too." "What?" "They bring your presence home to me," she said quietly. "On days when you catch many fish, you come home exhausted but proud, and you spend the evening repairing nets and equipment, already planning the next day. But on empty net days, you sit with me, you talk with me. You're actually here, not already out on the boat in your mind. I know this sounds selfish, but I treasure those days when you come home empty-handed, because I get all of you, not just your tired body." This perspective shook something loose in Sato. He had been measuring his worth entirely by fish caught, seeing empty nets as pure failure. But Hana was showing him that those apparently failed days brought other things, things he had been too ashamed to notice. A few days later, on another empty net morning, Sato pulled up his nets and found not fish, but a tangled mass of seaweed. His first reaction was the familiar frustration. But then he remembered Hana's words and looked at the seaweed more carefully. It was a type he had seen farmers collecting for fertilizer. Instead of throwing it back in disgust, he kept it. When he returned to shore, he asked one of the farmers if the seaweed was useful. The farmer's eyes lit up. "This is exactly what I need for my fields. Would you sell it to me?" The money from the seaweed wasn't as much as fish would have brought, but it was something. And more than that, Sato realized he had just turned a failed fishing day into a successful day by changing what he was looking for. He began experimenting with this perspective. On days when fish weren't biting, instead of stubbornly keeping his nets in the water, he would pay attention to what else was happening. He noticed patterns in bird behavior that told him where fish might be on better days. He observed current changes that helped him understand seasonal movements. He collected things that others might value, certain shells, seaweed, and interesting stones. But perhaps most importantly, he stopped defining himself solely by the fish caught. He began to see himself not just as a fisherman, but as someone who harvested from the sea. Sometimes the harvest was fish. Sometimes it was knowledge. Sometimes it was presence of his wife. Sometimes it was objects that others valued for reasons he had never considered. Other fishermen noticed the change in Sato. He no longer came to shore on empty net days looking defeated and ashamed. He seemed interested in what he had found, curious about the day's experience even if it hadn't been conventionally successful. One young fisherman who was struggling with his own inconsistent catches asked Sato, "How do you stay positive when you fail?" "I stopped calling it failure," Sato replied. "Some days I catch fish. Some days I catch other things. Some days I catch nothing but return with more understanding of the sea. Every day has value if I'm looking for value rather than defining success narrowly." He showed the young fisherman his collection of interesting finds from supposedly failed days. "If I had been catching fish every single day, I never would have noticed any of this." My failure to catch fish opened my attention to everything else. Now I know the sea that the most successful fishermen don't have, because their constant success never forced them to look at anything else. A Zen monk who was visiting the village heard about Sato's philosophy and came to talk with him. "You've learned something that many people never learn," the monk said. "You've learned that failure and success are not opposites but neighbors. Sometimes what looks like failure is actually success, in a form you didn't recognize. Sometimes getting what you wanted would have prevented you from discovering something more valuable." Sato nodded. "For years, I prayed to the sea gods to never return with empty nets. Now I understand that the empty nets were answering a different prayer, one I didn't know I was making. They were teaching me to see value beyond the obvious, to measure worth by more than one standard, to be present to what is, rather than always grasping for what should be." The monk smiled. "The empty net is a great teacher. Because it's empty, it can receive anything. Because it failed to catch what you were seeking, it caught things you weren't looking for. Sometimes the best gifts come through the door of apparent failure." Years later, when Sato was old and teaching his grandson to fish, the boy became discouraged after several days with small catches. "Grandfather, I'm not good at this. I keep failing." Sato smiled and showed his grandson the collection he had accumulated over the years. Unusual shells, interesting stones, pieces of driftwood, observations written down about sea and weather, and recipes for using seaweed. All of these came from days when I caught few or no fish. If every day had been successful by the measure I was using, then I would never have discovered any of this. Sometimes the empty net brings exactly what you need, just not what you wanted. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't fear failure. Don't rush to judge whether a day was successful or not. Some of my best days looked like my worst days at the time. The measure of success that seems obvious often isn't the most important one. Keep your eyes open for what the sea is actually offering you, not just what you came looking for." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own empty nets. What apparent failures in your life might be successes, wearing different clothes? What disappointments might have brought gifts you were too focused on the disappointment to notice? What seemed like coming up empty might have actually been receiving something more valuable than what you were seeking. You don't need to catch fish every day. You don't need to succeed by conventional measures every time. Sometimes the empty net is exactly what you need, bringing lessons and gifts that success would have prevented you from receiving. Sometimes failure is just success that requires better eyes to see it. Rest now in acceptance of all your empty nets, all your apparent failures, all the times you came up short by the measures you were using. These weren't wastes. They were opportunities to learn different measures, to discover unexpected value, to receive what you weren't looking for but desperately needed. The empty net isn't a tragedy, it's a teaching. Let it teach you tonight. As you rest in the emptiness, that's actually fullness waiting to be recognized. In the capital city lived a tea master named Soho, who had spent 50 years perfecting the art of the tea ceremony. His movements were flawless, his timing exact, his aesthetic sense refined beyond what most people could achieve in several lifetimes. Every detail of his ceremonies was considered and precise. The angle of the bowl, the temperature of the water, the moment to pass the tea, the positioning of each implement. Soho's ceremonies were legendary. People would wait years for an invitation to attend. Wealthy patrons offered fortunes to have Soho perform ceremonies for their guests. Other tea masters studied his techniques, trying to replicate his perfection. But Soho himself had grown troubled. Despite his technical mastery, despite the acclaim, he felt his ceremonies had become performances rather than genuine expressions of tea mind. He was so focused on executing each movement perfectly that he had lost connection to the spirit beneath the movements. His ceremonies were flawless, but somehow empty. On his 70th birthday, Soho decided to retire from public ceremonies. He would perform one final tea ceremony, a farewell to his long career, and then step away to live simply in a small temple. He prepared meticulously for this final ceremony. He invited only his closest students and a few respected elders who had followed his work for decades. He selected implements he had used for years, choosing each for its history and meaning. He practiced the movements daily in the weeks leading up to the ceremony, ensuring everything would be perfect. The day of the ceremony arrived. Soho entered the tea room with his usual grace, began with his usual precision. His guests watched in respectful silence, knowing they were witnessing a master's final performance. Then, midway through the ceremony, something unexpected happened. As Soho reached for the tea bowl, his hand trembled slightly. Whether from age, emotion, or simple nervousness, he couldn't say. The tremor caused him to fumble the bowl. It didn't fall or break, but his grip was clumsy, his movement awkward. The flow of the ceremony was disrupted by this imperfect moment. Soho's first instinct was mortification. After 50 years of perfect execution, his final ceremony was marred by a clumsy mistake. But then something shifted in him. The mistake had broken his focus on perfection, and in that break, he suddenly felt present in a way he hadn't been during a ceremony in years. He picked up the bowl, not with perfect grace, but with simple honesty, with the actual movement of an old man holding a bowl. He continued the ceremony, but something had changed. He was no longer performing perfectly. He was just making tea, sharing tea, being present with his guests. The movements that followed weren't as technically flawless as usual, but they had a quality his perfect performances had lacked. They were real. They were Soho actually being here, making tea, connecting with his guests, rather than Soho executing a perfect reproduction of the tea master role. When the ceremony ended, there was a long silence. Then one of the elder guests spoke. "That was the finest tea ceremony I have ever experienced." Soho was confused. "But I made mistakes." "The execution wasn't clean." "The execution was finally clean," the elder replied. "Clean of performance, clean of ego, clean of the need to be perfect. For the first time in decades, I saw you actually making tea rather than demonstrating how tea should be made. Your fumble was the most important moment of the ceremony. It dropped you out of performance and into presence." Another guest agreed. "I've attended 6 of your ceremonies over the years. They were all technically superior to today's, but this one touched me in a way the others never did. The imperfection made it human. It made it real. It made it about tea, rather than about perfection. Soho sat with this feedback for a long time. He realized that his 50-year pursuit of perfect execution had taken him away from genuine expression. He had become so skilled at performing the tea ceremony that he had forgotten how to simply make tea with presence and care. "I thought mastery meant perfect execution," Soho told his students later. "I thought the goal was to perform each movement so exactly that no flaw could be found. But that kind of mastery is dead. It's impressive but not alive. Today, when I fumbled and had to let go of perfection, I finally rediscovered what tea ceremony is actually about. Presence, connection, the simple act of sharing tea with other humans." He looked at his hands, still slightly trembling. "These old hands that made a mistake taught me more than 50 years of perfect practice. They taught me that perfect execution becomes perfect only when you stop trying to perfect it, when you let go of performance and sink into presence." One student asked, "So should we not practice? Should we not work toward technical excellence?" "Practice," Soho replied. "Develop your technique. But don't let technique become an end in itself. Practice until the movements are natural, then let go of trying to perform them perfectly. Use your technique to support presence, not to replace it. Master the form so completely that you can forget the form and just be here, making tea." He picked up a tea bowl, holding it with the same slight tremble. "See this imperfection? This is actually perfection because it's real. It's an old man's hand actually holding a bowl. The steady, flawless grip I cultivated for decades was impressive, but it was also a kind of lie. It hid my actual hand behind a perfect performance. This trembling hand is honest, and honesty is more important than perfection." In the weeks following his final ceremony, Soho began making tea in a completely different way. He still had all his technical skills, all his aesthetic sensitivity, but he used them lightly, allowing imperfection, welcoming the unexpected, staying present with what was actually happening rather than executing a mental script. He made tea for strangers, for children, for anyone who wanted to share a bowl. These weren't formal ceremonies with guests and perfect settings. They were just tea, made with care, shared with presence. And people felt more touched by these simple offerings than they had by his legendary perfect ceremonies. "You've become a greater tea master by letting go of mastery," one visitor observed. "I've become an actual tea master by letting go of the performance of mastery," Soho clarified. "I was skilled before, but I wasn't real. Now I'm both skilled and real. The skill supports the reality rather than replacing it. That's the difference." A young tea student struggling to perfect his own technique asked Soho for guidance. "How do I know when my practice is good enough? When can I stop trying to perfect my movements? When perfection becomes a barrier rather than a path," Soho replied. "Practice until the movements are natural and trustworthy. Then let go of trying to make them perfect and just let them be. The movement from practice to performance to presence, that's the journey. Most people stop at performance, endlessly perfecting their execution. The final step is letting go of perfection and discovering presence." He made tea for the young student, his hands moving with practiced skill, but also with slight tremors, small imperfections, human reality. "See how I make tea now? I'm not performing or demonstrating, I'm just making tea. The years of practice allow me to do it well, but letting go of perfection allows me to do it truly. Both are necessary, but the second is what makes it complete. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what you've been perfecting, performing, trying to execute flawlessly. What would happen if you let your hands tremble slightly? If you allowed imperfection? If you stopped performing mastery and just did the thing itself, present and real? Perfect execution is impressive, but presence is what actually connects, what actually matters, what actually makes any practice complete. You've practiced enough, you've refined enough. Now it's time to let go of perfection and discover what's on the other side. Not sloppiness, not carelessness, but genuine presence that includes both skill and imperfection, both mastery and humanity. Rest now in this completion. Let yourself fumble slightly. Let yourself be real rather than perfect. The Tea Master's Last Cup teaches that the journey ends not in flawless execution, but in authentic presence. You've arrived, not at perfection, but at something better, yourself, skilled and real, doing what you do with care and presence, and the slight tremble of actual human hands. That's perfection. That's the completion. That's the teaching. Sleep now, no longer performing, just being. This is enough. You are enough. The perfect becomes perfect when you stop trying to perfect it. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. In a mountain monastery, there was a pond that perfectly reflected the sky above it. At night, when the moon was full, there would appear to be two moons, one in the sky and one in the water. A young monk named Daiki was troubled by this. Which is the real moon? He would ask. The one in the sky or the one in the water? The other monks would laugh. Obviously, the one in the sky is real. The one in the water is just a reflection. But Daiki wasn't satisfied with this answer. He would sit by the pond for hours, watching both moons. The moon in the water was just as bright, just as beautiful, just as present to his vision as the moon in the sky. In what sense was it less real? He asked his teacher, Master Hakuin, "If I can see the moon in the water, if it affects me just as much as the moon in the sky, how is it not real?" Hakuin smiled. "Touch the moon in the sky." "I can't. It's too far away." "Touch the moon in the water!" Daiki reached toward the pond, but as his hand approached the water, the moon's reflection rippled and fragmented. "I can't touch that one either." "Then in what way is one more real than the other?" Hakuin asked. "Both exist in your experience. Both affect you. Both are impossible to grasp. What makes you think reality and reflection are different things?" This question opened something in Daiki's understanding. He had been taught to distinguish between real and reflected, original and copy, substance and shadow. But his experience didn't support these neat distinctions. When he looked at the moon in the water, he really saw it. The experience of seeing it was real, even if what he was seeing was a reflection. When he felt moved by its beauty, the emotion was real, regardless of whether he was looking at the original or the reflection. His life, his experience, his feelings, all of these were happening in response to both moons equally. He began to wonder about other reflections in his life. When he thought about his deceased mother, was he experiencing his actual mother or just a memory, a reflection of who she had been. Yet his love for her was real. His grief was real. The way she had shaped him was real. Did it matter that he could only access a reflection of her, not her actual presence? When he read teachings from ancient masters, was he experiencing their actual wisdom or just reflections of it, filtered through translation and time and his own interpretation? Yet the teachings affected him, changed him, helped him. The reflections had real power. When he practiced meditation and caught glimpses of what the teachings called his true nature, was he experiencing the actual thing or just reflections of it in his limited consciousness? Yet whatever he was experiencing, it was transforming his life. One evening, Daiki sat by the pond with Master Hakuin, watching the two moons. "Master," Daiki said, "I think I've been making a mistake. I've been trying to distinguish between the real and the reflected, but everything I experience is in some sense a reflection. I never touch reality directly. I only experience reflections of it in my consciousness, interpretations of it through my senses, and understanding. If I dismiss all reflections as unreal, I dismiss my entire life." Hakuin nodded. "This is a good understanding. The question isn't whether something is real or reflected. The question is whether you're aware that you're looking at a reflection, or whether you mistake the reflection for the only reality." He pointed at the moon in the water. "The danger isn't in seeing this moon. The danger is in thinking this is the only moon, in believing that your reflection of reality is reality itself. But if you know you're seeing a reflection, if you remain aware that there's something beyond what you can directly experience, then the reflection serves its purpose. It points you toward what it reflects." Over the following months, Daiki deepened this understanding. He learned to appreciate reflections without mistaking them for the whole truth. He could love his memory of his mother while knowing it was a reflection of her, not her actual presence. He could value teachings while knowing they were fingers pointing at truth, not truth itself. He could work with his experiences in meditation while knowing they were reflections of his true nature, not the full reality of it. He found this understanding incredibly freeing. He no longer needed to grasp the ungraspable or fully understand the incomprehensible. He could work with reflections, learn from them, be transformed by them, without needing them to be more than what they were. One day, a new student came to the monastery and asked Daiki the same question he had once asked. "Which moon is real? The one in the sky, or the one in the water?" Daiki smiled, remembering his own confusion. "Both are real," he replied. "One is the original, one is the reflection. But your experience of both is real. The light from the sky moon and the light from the water moon both enter your eyes. Both create responses in your consciousness. Both affect you. The only difference is that you can't directly touch either one, and one will remain even if you disturb the water." He looked at the two moons thoughtfully. Most of what we call our life is reflection. Reflection of the past in memory. Reflection of reality in consciousness. Reflection of truth in words and concepts. We live in a world of reflections. This isn't a problem unless we forget that they're reflections. Then we start fighting about whose reflection is most accurate, claiming our interpretation is the only real one, trying to grasp what can't be grasped. The new student asked, "So, how should we relate to reflections?" "Appreciate them. Daiki replied. Learn from them. Be transformed by them, but hold them lightly. Know that they point to something beyond themselves. The moon in the water shows you where to look for the moon in the sky. Your experiences point you toward the truth beyond experience. Your understanding reflects reality, but isn't identical to reality. This awareness keeps you humble and keeps you seeking. Years later, when Daiki became a teacher, he would often bring students to the pond on full moon nights. He would have them look at both moons and ask, which is real? Some students would confidently say the sky moon was real and the water moon was just a reflection. Daiki would ask them, then why can you see them both equally well? Why does the water moon move you just as much as the sky moon? Other students, trying to be clever, would say both were real. Daiki would ask them, then why does one remain when you throw a stone in the water and the other doesn't? A few students would grow quiet, realizing the question itself was based on assumptions that didn't hold up under examination. These were the students Daiki knew were ready for deeper teaching. The question which is real assumes reality and reflection are opposites, he would tell these students. But actually, reflection is a form of reality. It's a real reflection, a real experience, a real perception. The problem isn't with reflection itself. The problem is when we mistake partial reflection for complete reality, when we think our limited experience encompasses the whole truth, when we cling to our interpretations as if they were the things themselves. He would point at the two moons. Your life is like looking at these moons. You're always experiencing reflections, never the thing itself. You reflect reality through your senses, your consciousness, your understanding. This reflection is a real experience. It shapes you, teaches you, transforms you. But it's not the whole story. Stay aware of this. Appreciate your reflections. Learn from them. But don't mistake them for the unreflected reality. One student asked, will we ever experience unreflected reality? Will we ever see beyond reflection? Daiki was quiet for a long moment, then said, perhaps in death, perhaps in enlightenment, perhaps never. I don't know, but I know this. The effort to see beyond reflection is itself valuable. The awareness that we're experiencing reflection keeps us humble, keeps us seeking, keeps us from absolutizing our limited perspectives. And sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, the reflection becomes so perfect, so transparent, that the distinction between reflected and unreflected almost disappears. Those moments of clarity are themselves gifts of the reflective nature of consciousness. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider that your entire experience right now is a reflection. These words are reflections of ideas. Your understanding of them is a reflection of the words. Your sense of yourself is a reflection of something deeper. Your thoughts are reflections of the underlying mental activity you don't directly experience. Everything you know comes to you as a reflection. This doesn't make your experience less real. It makes it what it is, a real experience of reflected reality. You're seeing the moon in the water, and that seeing is genuine, even if what you're seeing is a reflection. Let this understanding help you hold everything a bit more lightly tonight. Your worries are reflections of possible futures. Your regrets are reflections of the past. Your sense of who you are is a reflection of something deeper and more mysterious. than you can fully know. All of these reflections are real experiences, but they are not the whole truth. Rest in the understanding that you live in a world of reflections, and that's actually okay. You don't need to grasp the ungraspable or fully understand the mystery. You can appreciate the moon in the water without needing to hold the moon in the sky. You can live with reflections, learn from them, be moved by them, without mistaking them for everything that is. Both moons are beautiful. Both are real in their own way. And you, experiencing both, are having a real experience of something that transcends both. Rest in that paradox tonight. Rest in reflection. Rest in the mystery of experiencing what you can never fully grasp. It's enough. It's always been enough. The reflection of peace is peaceful. The reflection of rest is restful. You don't need the original when the reflection serves you so well. Sleep now, watching both moons, knowing both are real and neither is everything. That's the truth. That's enough. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a valley between two mountain ranges, there was a river that confused everyone who saw it. Most rivers in the region flowed from high elevations to low, following gravity as rivers should. But this river appeared to run uphill, flowing from what looked like lower ground to higher ground, defying logic and nature. Villagers argued about the river for generations. Some said it was cursed, that supernatural forces made it run backwards. Others insisted it was an optical illusion, that the river only appeared to run uphill but actually didn't. A few claimed the river was evidence of magic in the world, proof that natural laws could be suspended. A scholar named Fumiko came to study the peculiar river. She was a woman who trusted observation over superstition, who believed that understanding came from careful study rather than easy assumptions. She spent weeks walking the river's length, taking measurements, making careful notes. What she discovered was unexpected. The river wasn't running uphill at all, though it certainly appeared to be. The optical illusion was created by the unusual topology of the valley. The way surrounding hills created a visual context that made lower ground appear higher and higher ground appear lower. When you adjusted for this visual distortion and looked at actual elevations, the river was flowing downhill as it should, following gravity perfectly. But there was a second discovery, more interesting than the first. There was a short section where the river actually did flow uphill, pushed by an underground spring with such force that it created a brief reversal of normal flow before gravity took over again. This wasn't magic or curse, it was hydrology, underground pressure overcoming gravity temporarily, a natural phenomenon that looked miraculous only because people didn't understand the forces involved. Fumiko shared her findings with the villagers, explaining the optical illusion and the underground spring. Some villagers were relieved to have the mystery explained. Others were disappointed. They had preferred the magical explanation to the scientific one. But an old farmer named Gonji said something that made Fumiko reconsider what she thought she'd discovered. "The river teaches something important," Gonji said. "It teaches that things can look completely wrong while being completely right, that what appears to violate natural laws might just be responding to forces we don't understand yet." He pointed to his fields. "I plant crops that other farmers say won't grow in this soil. They say I'm working against nature, that I should plant what everyone plants. But I've learned that this soil has properties they don't understand. That what looks like wrong farming is actually right farming for these specific conditions. Fumiko thought about this. She had explained the river's apparent backwards flow, but Gonji was suggesting something deeper, that the river taught people to question their assumptions about what's natural, what's possible, what's right. The river looked wrong, but was responding perfectly to actual conditions, both the optical conditions that made flow appear backwards and the geological conditions that briefly pushed water uphill. You're saying the river teaches us to look deeper before judging? Fumiko asked. More than that, Gonji replied. It teaches us that backwards and forwards depend on what forces you're aware of. To someone who only knows gravity, water flowing uphill is impossible, wrong, against nature. But to someone who understands underground pressure, water flowing uphill is perfectly natural, a correct response to present forces. He gestured to the river. How many things in life look wrong because we're only seeing some of the forces involved? How many people are judged for going against the flow when they're actually responding to forces others can't see? Over the following months, Fumiko expanded her study. She began collecting stories of things that appeared to violate natural expectations, but actually didn't. They just responded to forces that weren't immediately obvious. A tree growing bent at a strange angle because of prevailing winds that had since died down. A flower blooming in winter because of an underground hot spring. A bird flying inland before storms because it sensed pressure changes humans couldn't detect. Each example taught the same lesson. What appears wrong might be responding perfectly to reality, while what appears right might be ignorant of important forces. A young mother came to Fumiko with a problem. My son won't follow the path I've set for him. He's going backwards from where he should go, against everything natural and right. How do I make him flow the right direction? Tell me about your son, Fumiko said. The mother described a boy who refused to take over the family business, who wanted instead to become a traveling musician. It's backwards, she insisted. Children should continue family work. That's the natural flow. He's going against nature. Or he's responding to forces you're not seeing, Fumiko suggested gently. Is he talented musically? Very, but that's not the point. Talent doesn't change duty. Doesn't it? Fumiko asked. The river appears to flow backwards because of forces beneath the surface. Perhaps your son is flowing in a direction that looks backwards to you, but is actually responding to forces inside him, talents, passions, purposes that you can't see or don't value. Just because his flow doesn't match your expectations doesn't mean it's wrong. She told the mother about the river, about how it appeared to defy nature, but actually followed it perfectly when all forces were considered. Your son might be like that river. What looks like backwards rebellion might be forward movement towards something he's meant to do. The question isn't whether he's flowing the way you expected, but whether he's flowing true to himself. This conversation troubled the mother, but she began to observe her son differently. She noticed how music seemed to flow from him naturally, how he came alive when playing, how his path, though different from hers, had its own rightness to it. Eventually, though it was difficult, she accepted that his backwards path might be his right path. Word spread about Fumiko's teachings about the backwards river. People began using it as a way to reconsider their own judgments. When someone's path looked wrong, they would ask, "Am I seeing all the forces involved? Or am I judging based on incomplete understanding?" A magistrate applied this thinking to a legal case. A man had broken a law, but when the magistrate investigated deeper, he found forces that explained the law-breaking in a way that changed the judgment entirely. The man wasn't defying order. He was responding to a greater order that the law itself hadn't anticipated. A teacher applied it to a student who learned differently from others. Instead of judging the student as backwards or wrong, the teacher looked for the forces, the different cognitive patterns, the unique intelligences that made the student's apparently backwards approach actually forward for him. Years later, Fumiko's study of the backwards river had become famous beyond the valley. She was invited to give lectures, to advise rulers, to teach scholars. But she always returned to the river itself, watching its apparently impossible flow, using it to remind herself that understanding requires humility, that what appears wrong might be right in ways she hasn't yet grasped. A visiting philosopher asked her, "But aren't some things actually wrong? Doesn't your river teaching lead to excusing everything, to saying nothing is really backwards because we just don't understand the forces?" "No," Fumiko replied carefully. "Some things are genuinely wrong. They're responding to destructive forces like cruelty or ignorance or selfishness. The river teaches discernment, not relativism. It teaches us to look for forces we might not see before judging, but after looking, we still make judgments. The difference is, our judgments are informed by deeper understanding rather than surface appearance." She pointed to the river. "This river looks backwards, but isn't. But if a farmer tried to make his irrigation flow uphill without underground spring pressure, that would be genuinely backwards, genuinely wrong. The teaching isn't that everything is right. The teaching is that apparent wrongness requires investigation before judgment. Some backwards flows are responding to forces we need to understand. Others are just backwards." Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider things in your life that appear backwards or wrong. Your own path that doesn't match expectations. Other people's choices that confuse you. Circumstances that seem to violate how things should be. Before judging these as wrong, ask, what forces might I not be seeing? What underground pressures might be pushing flow in directions that look impossible, but are actually perfectly natural? The backwards river teaches humility in judgment, curiosity before conclusion, openness to forces you don't yet understand. Not everything that looks wrong is right, but some things that look wrong are responding to reality more accurately than things that look right. The only way to know is to look deeper, to consider forces beyond the obvious, to remain humble about the limits of your understanding. Rest now in acceptance of apparent backwards flows in yourself and others. Let the river run its course, responding to all the forces acting on it, both visible and hidden. Trust that what looks impossible might be possible, that what seems backwards might be forward, that nature is wiser than our quick judgments about what's natural. The river knows where it's going, even when it appears to go the wrong way, As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. In a city famous for its artists, there was a renowned sculptor named Kaori who had created magnificent works for temples, palaces, and public squares throughout the land. She was known for her perfectionism, her unwillingness to declare any work complete until every detail was exactly right. At age 60, Kaori received a commission that she knew would be her masterpiece, a memorial sculpture for the city's founder. She had complete artistic freedom and unlimited time. This would be her legacy, the work by which all her other work would be judged. She began with intense focus, creating preliminary sketches, building models, and selecting the perfect stone. The first year was spent in planning. The second year is spent roughing out the basic form. By the third year, the sculpture was recognizably taking shape as a figure of dignity and strength, capturing something essential about leadership and vision. But as the sculpture neared completion, something strange happened. Kaori couldn't finish it. Every time she thought she was done, she would see another adjustment to make, another detail to refine, another element that wasn't quite right. The nose could be more precise, the hands could be more expressive, the drapery could flow more naturally. Years passed. The sculpture stood in her studio, nearly complete, but never quite complete enough. City officials would visit, would ask when they might see the finished work, and Kaori would assure them it was almost ready, just a few more refinements needed. 10 years after beginning the project, Kaori was still working on the same sculpture. It had gone through countless iterations. Areas she had refined years earlier, she would redo, claiming her skills had improved, and she could do better now. The sculpture had become an obsession, a project that consumed her life but never reached completion. A young sculptor named Isamu, who admired Kaori's earlier work, came to apprentice with her. He expected to learn from watching a master complete her masterpiece. Instead, he found an old woman trapped in endless refinement, unable to stop working on a sculpture that had been nearly done for years. "Why don't you declare it finished?" Isamu finally asked, after watching Kaori rework the same hand for the third time since he arrived. "Because it's not perfect yet," Kaori replied. "I can see the ideal form in my mind. This stone version still falls short. I need to keep working until the stone matches the vision." "But will it ever match?" Isamu asked gently. "Will the real sculpture ever match the perfect one in your imagination?" Kaori had no answer. She had never asked herself this question. She had always assumed that with enough work, enough refinement, enough time, she could make the physical sculpture match her mental ideal. A Zen teacher named Etsuko, who had known Kaori for decades, visited the studio. She looked at the nearly complete sculpture with a sad expression. "You're destroying it," Etsuko said. "I'm perfecting it," Kaori protested. "No, you're overworking it. The sculpture lost its life years ago when you couldn't stop refining it. Now it's becoming tight, over-controlled, anxious. I can see your perfectionism in every surface. The early spontaneity is gone, replaced by compulsive detail." She touched the sculpture gently. Completion doesn't mean achieving perfection. It means recognizing when continuing diminishes rather than improves. This sculpture was probably finished 5 years ago, but you couldn't see it because you were comparing it to an impossible ideal rather than accepting it as the real thing it actually was. Kaori wanted to argue, but she knew Etsuko was right. She looked at her sculpture with honest eyes for the first time in years. It was beautiful in parts, overworked in others. The areas she had refined most recently were actually worse than earlier versions. Too controlled, too fussy, too perfect. The sculpture had lost its breath somewhere along the way. "How do I know when something is done?" Kaori asked quietly. "How do I distinguish between stopping because it's complete and stopping because I've given up?" "You feel it," Etsuko replied. "True completion has a quality of rightness, even if the work isn't perfect. Giving up has a quality of defeat. But what you're doing now is neither completion nor giving up. It's compulsive continuation, working past the point where work helps. That's different from both completion and abandonment." She looked at Kaori directly. The sculpture should have been installed in the city square years ago, where people would appreciate it. Instead, it's trapped in your studio, being endlessly refined toward an ideal it will never reach. You're preventing it from serving its purpose because you can't accept that it's good enough. That's not dedication to excellence. That's fear disguised as perfectionism. This truth landed hard. Kaori realized she had been afraid to finish the sculpture, afraid to have it judged, afraid it wouldn't live up to her reputation. As long as it remained unfinished in her studio, it remained perfect in potential. Once completed and installed, it would be real, subject to criticism, limited by its actual qualities rather than protected by its imagined ones. "I've been hiding," Kaori admitted, calling it refinement when actually it was avoidance. With Etsuko's help, Kaori looked at the sculpture one more time and made a decision. She declared it complete as it was, not perfect, but real. She stopped working on it and arranged for its installation. When the sculpture was finally revealed in the city square, public response was mixed. Some people loved it. Others thought it was good, but not as exceptional as they'd expected from a decade of work. Critics noted both its strengths and its weaknesses. It was not a perfect masterpiece. It was a good sculpture with both beautiful passages and overworked areas, a real work rather than an ideal one. And Kaori found unexpected peace in this. The sculpture was done, installed, serving its purpose. It wasn't perfect, but it was complete. It had moved from endless potential to limited actuality, and this movement was itself a kind of perfection. Not the perfection of flawless execution, but the perfection of genuine completion. "I spent 10 years trying to make it perfect," Kaori told Isamu, standing together, looking at the installed sculpture. "I should have spent 3 years making it good, and then accepted that good was enough. The extra 7 years didn't make it better, they just delayed it." Isamu asked, "But how will you know with your next work? How will you know when to stop?" "I'll try to recognize when I'm working from love versus working from fear," Kaori said. "When I'm working from love, I'm responding to the actual piece, helping it become itself. When I'm working from fear, I'm trying to make it match an impossible ideal, trying to protect myself from criticism or judgment. The work from fear doesn't improve the piece. It just makes it tighter, more controlled, more dead." She touched a rough area of the sculpture that she had always intended to smooth further. See this? For years I planned to refine it, but now I see it gives texture, life, contrast. My perfectionism wanted to eliminate it, but actually it's one of the better parts. Sometimes what we think is incomplete is actually just real, and real includes roughness, includes elements that don't match the ideal. In her remaining years, Kaori created several more sculptures, and each one she completed more quickly than the last. She learned to recognize the moment when a work was done, not perfect, but complete. She learned that completion meant allowing the work to be what it actually was, rather than endlessly pushing it toward what it might ideally be. My final work taught me that sometimes completion means stopping, not finishing, she told students. Sometimes good enough is actually excellent, because continuing would diminish rather than improve. Sometimes the work is done when you can let it go, not when it's perfect. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what in your life needs completion rather than more refinement. What projects, relationships, phases, identities have you been endlessly working on, unable to declare them finished because they don't match your ideal? What would it mean to accept them as complete, as good enough, as done? Completion doesn't require perfection. It requires recognition that continuing is no longer serving the work or serving you. It requires courage to let the real thing exist, rather than protecting the imagined perfect thing by keeping it perpetually incomplete. Rest now in completion. Let yourself be done with some things, not because they're perfect, but because they're finished. Let yourself stop refining and start living with what actually is, rather than what might ideally be. The sculptor's final work teaches that holding on too long destroys as surely as letting go too early. Learn to recognize the difference. And then, when it's time, let go. There was a water bearer in a mountain village who carried water from the stream to the town each day. She used a wooden pole across her shoulders with a large pot hanging from each end. One pot was perfect, without flaw, and always delivered a full portion of water at journey's end. The other pot had a crack running down one side, and by the time the water bearer reached town, it was only half full. This went on for 2 years. The perfect pot was proud of its accomplishment, delivering full measures each day, fulfilling the purpose for which it was made. The cracked pot was ashamed of its imperfection, distressed that it could only do half of what it was meant to do. Finally, the cracked pot spoke to the water bearer one morning by the stream. "I am ashamed of myself. I apologize to you." "Why?" asked the water bearer. "What are you ashamed of?" "For 2 years, I have been able to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to town. Because of my flaw, you have to do more work, and you don't get full value for your efforts." The water bearer smiled kindly. "As we return to town today, I want you to notice the flowers along the path." As they walked up the hill from the stream, the cracked pot did notice the beautiful wildflowers growing along one side of the path. This cheered it somewhat, but at the end of the trail it still felt bad because it had leaked out half its water again. The water bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I've always known about your crack, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, And every day, while we've walked back, you've watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my home and to sell at market. Without you being just the way you are, I would not have this beauty to grace my life. The cracked pot was silent, absorbing this revelation. What it had thought was its greatest weakness had been serving a purpose all along. The crack that made it imperfect for one purpose made it perfect for another purpose it never knew existed. A student who heard this story asked the local Zen teacher, "But wouldn't it have been better if the pot had no crack? Then the water bearer would have had twice as much water and could have watered the flowers separately." The teacher smiled. "You're thinking of efficiency. The story is teaching about purpose. The cracked pot thought its only purpose was to carry water to town. It judged itself a failure at this purpose. But it was also watering flowers, creating beauty, serving a function it never imagined. What appears to be failure at one purpose may be success at a different purpose we don't yet recognize." The teacher continued, "Most of us are like the cracked pot. We have flaws, weaknesses, places where we leak, ways we don't measure up to our idea of what we should be. We judge ourselves harshly for these cracks. But often, these very flaws are serving purposes we cannot see. The things we think make us inadequate may be making us exactly adequate for something we don't yet understand." A woman in the village heard this teaching and thought about her own life. She had always been too sensitive, too easily moved to tears, too affected by others' suffering. In a society that valued stoicism and emotional control, she felt defective. She tried to toughen up, to be stronger, to not leak emotions everywhere she went. But then she noticed something. The very sensitivity she judged as weakness made her extraordinarily good at caring for those who were ill or grieving. People who were suffering would seek her out because her emotional openness created a safe space for their own grief. Her tears gave others permission to cry. Her tender heart helped heal other tender hearts. She was a cracked pot, yes, leaking emotional responses all along the path. But in her wake, flowers of compassion and healing grew. What she had thought was her failure was actually serving a purpose she had never imagined. A man in the village had a different crack. He couldn't focus on one thing for long. His mind would jump from interest to interest, never specializing, never becoming an expert in anything. In a society that valued mastery and deep expertise, he felt scattered and inadequate. But then he recognized what his crack had created. Because he knew a little about many things, he could connect ideas across different fields. He could see patterns that specialists missed. He could translate between different domains of knowledge, creating bridges where others saw only walls. The very quality he had judged as inability to focus was actually ability to see relationships. His crack was watering flowers he had never noticed. The teacher who told the story of the cracked pot would say, "Before you try to fix yourself, before you work so hard to seal up all your cracks, pause. Ask yourself, what is this crack watering? Where are flowers growing because of my imperfections? What purposes might I be serving that I haven't recognized because I'm so busy judging myself as broken?" This doesn't mean we shouldn't work on genuine problems or grow beyond destructive patterns, but it means we should look carefully at what we think are flaws. Sometimes What appears to be a weakness is actually a strength in disguise. Sometimes, what we're failing at in one area, we're succeeding at in another area we haven't valued or noticed. The perfect pot in the story delivered water reliably, but it created no beauty. It fulfilled its intended function, but nothing more. The cracked pot, by failing at perfect water delivery, succeeded at something the perfect pot could never do. It made flowers grow. Tonight, as you rest, you might think about your own cracks, the ways you leak, the places you feel inadequate or broken. Instead of judging these cracks harshly, you might ask, what flowers might these cracks be watering? What beauty might be growing along the path of my imperfection? You are not meant to be a perfect vessel that holds everything in. You are meant to be authentically yourself, cracks and all. And those cracks, those places where you leak, those ways you fail to be perfect, they might be creating more beauty in the world than you realize. Rest now in acceptance of your cracked nature. You don't need to be sealed up and perfect. You're serving purposes you don't even know about, watering flowers you can't see, creating beauty through the very imperfections you judge so harshly. You are enough, cracks and all. More than enough. You are exactly what the world needs you to be. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. In a mountain monastery lived an old abbess named Ren, who kept in her private chamber an unusual mirror. The mirror was ancient, its surface darkened and worn until it reflected almost nothing. Visitors who saw it would often remark on its uselessness. "Your mirror shows nothing," they would say. "Why keep it? Get a new one that actually works." But Ren treasured this mirror and looked into it every morning. "It shows me exactly what I need to see," she would reply, though she never explained what she meant. One day, a vain young woman named Ayame came to the monastery seeking spiritual guidance. She was beautiful and knew it, spending hours each day on her appearance, constantly checking her reflection in every available surface. Her identity was completely wrapped up in her looks. During her first meeting with Ren, Ayame couldn't stop glancing at the darkened mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of herself. But the mirror showed nothing, just a dark, murky surface with barely a hint of reflection. "Your mirror is broken," Ayame said with annoyance. "Don't you want to see yourself?" "I see myself perfectly well in this mirror," Ren replied. "What do you see?" "Nothing. It's too dark." "Exactly," Ren said, and smiled. Ayame didn't understand, but as the days passed and she continued her stay at the monastery, she found herself repeatedly drawn to Ren's useless mirror. She would stand before it, searching for her reflection, finding almost nothing. It was deeply unsettling. Every other mirror showed her who she was, or at least showed her what she looked like. This mirror showed nothing. After a week, Ayame mentioned her frustration to Ren. "I hate your mirror. I keep looking into it hoping to see myself, but there's nothing there." "And what does that nothing teach you?" Ren asked. "That the mirror is broken." "Or that you're looking for the wrong thing," Ren suggested. "Every mirror you've ever looked into has shown you your face, your hair, your features. You've spent years studying that reflection, knowing exactly what you look like. My mirror can't show you that, so it forces you to consider, If you can't see your face, what else might you see? If appearance isn't available, what remains? Ayame thought about this. When she looked into normal mirrors, she saw features she judged. Eyes too small, nose too sharp, skin not smooth enough. She saw an image she tried to perfect, control, improve. The looking was never really seeing. It was evaluating, criticizing, trying to manage how others would perceive her. But in Ren's dark mirror, there was nothing to evaluate, no features to judge, no appearance to control. Just dark surface and, if she looked very carefully, the barest hint of a form. Not details, just presence. "What do you see when you look in your mirror?" Ayame asked Ren. "Nothing that can be improved or criticized," Ren replied. "Nothing that age can diminish or beauty can enhance. Just the simple fact of being here, looking. The mirror that shows everything tempts you to judge what you see. The mirror that shows nothing releases you from judgment." She came to stand beside Ayame before the dark mirror. "Look at us now, standing here together. Can you see our faces?" "Barely," Ayame admitted. "Can you tell which of us is more beautiful?" "No." "Can you see our ages, our features, the details that usually define us?" "No." "Then we stand equal before this mirror," Ren said. "Not as beautiful or plain, young or old, but simply as two beings, present in this moment. The mirror that shows nothing strips away all the superficial ways we distinguish ourselves and leaves only the essential fact: we are here." Over the following weeks, Ayame found herself looking into Ren's mirror more than any of the clear mirrors in the monastery. At first, this puzzled her. Why would she choose the mirror that showed nothing? But gradually she understood. She was tired of the constant judgment that came with seeing her reflection clearly. Tired of always evaluating, always trying to improve, always wondering if she looked acceptable. The dark mirror gave her relief from all that. It let her be present without being perceived, even by herself. It let her exist without the burden of appearance. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Ayame told Ren one morning. "The mirror that shows nothing is actually showing me something very important. That I exist independent of how I look. That there's a me underneath or beyond appearance. I've spent so many years focused on my reflection that I forgot there's someone doing the looking." Ren nodded with satisfaction. "The mirror that shows everything directs your attention outward, to surface and appearance. The mirror that shows nothing directs your attention inward, to the awareness that's looking. One mirror shows you an object to be evaluated. The other mirror reveals you as a subject who is aware." She touched the darkened surface gently. "Most people think a mirror's value is in how clearly it reflects. But sometimes a mirror's greatest value is in what it doesn't show. The absence of reflection can teach what the presence of reflection never could." Ayame stayed at the monastery for 6 months, and during that time, her relationship with mirrors changed completely. She no longer felt compelled to check her reflection constantly. When she did look in clear mirrors, she no longer saw an image to be judged, but simply a face, no more or less significant than any other face. "Your dark mirror freed me," she told Ren when she prepared to leave. "I thought I needed to see myself clearly to know who I was, but actually, seeing myself clearly kept me trapped in appearance, in judgment. in the endless work of managing how I looked, your mirror that showed nothing helped me discover the me that exists beyond appearance. After Ayami left, other students asked Ren about the mirror's teaching. Why not just remove all mirrors? One asked. If the point is to free people from attachment to appearance, why have mirrors at all? Because running from mirrors is still being controlled by them, Ren explained. The person who avoids all mirrors is as attached to appearance as the person who constantly looks. They're just attached to not looking rather than to looking. The dark mirror teaches something different. It teaches how to look without judgment, how to be aware of appearance without being enslaved by it. She held up the darkened mirror for the students to see. This mirror shows that appearance and essence are not the same. The clear mirror shows you appearance so clearly that you might mistake it for essence. This dark mirror removes appearance and asks, what remains? What are you when you can't see your face? That question leads to wisdom. A philosophical student asked, but isn't the dark mirror just another form of illusion? It hides reality rather than revealing it. Does it? Ren replied. The clear mirror shows you how light reflects off your features at this particular moment from this particular angle. Is that reality? Or is that also just one kind of information, one kind of seeing? The dark mirror shows you something the clear mirror can't. Your existence independent of your reflection. Both mirrors have their uses. The question is whether you're wise enough to learn from each what it has to teach. Years later, when Ren was dying, she gave the darkened mirror to her successor with specific instructions. Keep this mirror, even though students will mock it, even though visitors will offer to replace it. This mirror teaches what cannot be taught in words, that sometimes absence reveals more than presence, that sometimes nothing shows more than everything, that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from what we cannot see rather than from what we can. Tonight, as you rest, you might imagine looking into a mirror that shows nothing, not because the mirror is broken, but because it's teaching you something that clear mirrors never could. Without your reflection to evaluate and judge, what remains? Without your appearance to manage and improve, who are you? The mirror that shows nothing is inviting you to meet yourself beyond surface, beyond image, beyond all the ways you've learned to see yourself through others' eyes. In the dark mirror, there's just presence, just awareness, just the simple fact of being here without needing to look any particular way. Rest now in the dark mirror's teaching. Let yourself be unseen, unreflected, undefined by appearance. Let yourself exist in the space beyond image, where judgment can't reach, where evaluation has no meaning, where you simply are without needing to be any particular way. The mirror shows nothing, and in that nothing, everything essential is revealed. Sleep in that revelation tonight. There was a young dancer named Yuki who trained with single-minded devotion. She practiced hours each day, pushing her body to perfect every movement, striving to become the greatest dancer in the province. Her teachers praised her dedication. Her fellow dancers admired her discipline. She was on the path to everything she had dreamed of. Then, 1 week before the most important performance of her career, a performance that should determine her future, Yuki's ankle twisted during practice. Not badly enough to break, but enough to cause significant pain and swelling. The physician said she needed complete rest, no dancing, for at least 2 weeks. Yuki was devastated. Years of work ruined by one unlucky step. The opportunity lost, her future derailed. She sat in her room, staring at her swollen ankle, feeling bitter and cursed. An old woman who lived next door, a retired dancer named Chio, came to visit. She saw Yuki's tears, her anger, her sense of injustice. "Why did this happen?" Yuki cried. "I worked so hard. I did everything right. And now this injury destroys everything right before the most important moment." Chio sat quietly for a while, then asked, "Do you know why I stopped dancing?" Yuki wiped her eyes. "No, I assumed you retired naturally when you got older." "I didn't retire," Chio said. "I collapsed, right on stage, in the middle of a performance. My body simply gave out from years of pushing too hard, ignoring its signals, forcing it beyond its limits. I thought dedication meant never stopping, never resting, always pushing harder. My body tried to tell me I needed to slow down. Small pains, fatigue, growing stiffness. But I ignored all those messages. So finally my body had to shout, and the shout collapses." She looked at Yuki's ankle. "Your ankle is speaking to you. Maybe whispering before it has to shout. Maybe stopping you from something that would have caused greater harm." "But the performance," Yuki protested. "Will happen or won't happen," Chio interrupted gently. "But you're thinking only about what this injury prevents. Have you considered what it might be protecting you from or teaching you?" Over the next 2 weeks, forced to rest, Yuki had time to notice things she had been too busy to see. She realized she'd been pushing her body with a kind of violence, treating it as an obstacle to overcome, rather than a partner to work with. She noticed how exhausted she had become, how the joy had drained from dancing as it became only about perfection and achievement. She watched other dancers and saw things she had been too busy striving to notice. She saw beauty in imperfect movements, in dancers who worked within their limitations rather than fighting against them. She understood, for the first time, that her obsessive pushing was driven more by fear than by love. Fear of not being good enough, of being surpassed, of failing. When her ankle healed and she returned to dancing, something was different. She danced with more awareness, listening to her body, working with it rather than against it. She found that this actually improved her dancing. The movements became more natural, less forced, more authentic. The performance she had missed. Another dancer had taken her place and performed beautifully. Yuki realized the world continued without her, that her absence wasn't the catastrophe she had imagined. Years later, Yuki became a teacher. When students would suffer injuries and feel cursed, she would tell them about her twisted ankle. Sometimes what stops us is trying to save us. Not always, but sometimes. Before you curse an injury or illness or obstacle that forces you to stop, ask yourself, what was I rushing toward? What was I ignoring? What might this pause be protecting me from or teaching me? She would tell them about Chio, about collapse on stage, about bodies that whisper before they shout. Listen to the whispers, she would say. Pain is communication, not punishment. Forced rest is sometimes exactly what we need, even though we'd never choose it ourselves. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what has stopped you, what has forced you to slow down or pause. Are you fighting against it, seeing it only as an obstacle? Or can you wonder, even briefly, whether it might be serving a purpose you can't yet see. What if the things that stop you are sometimes trying to save you from something worse? What if forced rest is actually needed rest? What if your body or your circumstances are wiser than your plans? Rest now without fighting the rest. Let yourself be stopped, paused, held still, not as punishment, but as protection, not as failure, but as wisdom. Something in you knows you need this rest. Trust that knowing. Let yourself be saved by the very thing that seems to be stopping you. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a garden temple, the monks kept a beautiful crane named Haku in a large bamboo enclosure. Haku had been brought to the temple as an injured chick, nursed back to health, and raised in the enclosure where he was safe from predators and provided with ample food. For 3 years, Haku lived comfortably in his bamboo home. The monks fed him daily, cleaned his space, and even spoke to him in gentle tones. He had everything a crane could need except freedom, though the monks assured themselves they were keeping him safe. One day, a traveling priest named Osho visited the temple and saw Haku in his enclosure. The priest noticed that Haku's wings had grown strong and full. He was clearly capable of flight, yet he never attempted to fly beyond the bamboo walls, even though portions of the enclosure were open to the sky. "Why doesn't your crane fly away?" Osho asked the monks. "He could if he wanted to," one monk replied. "We don't clip his wings." But he stays because he knows this is where his food comes, where he's safe, where he belongs. Osho watched Haku for several days. The crane would walk around his enclosure, occasionally stretching his wings, but never attempting actual flight. It was as if Haku had forgotten that flight was even possible, that his wings had any purpose beyond stretching. On his last day at the temple, Osho asked permission to enter Haku's enclosure. He approached the crane slowly, then suddenly clapped his hands and shouted, startling Haku into the air. The crane's wings opened instinctively, and for a moment, Haku was flying, truly flying, circling above the enclosure in surprise. But after only 2 circles, Haku landed back in his familiar corner, as if the brief flight had frightened rather than thrilled him. He settled back into his routine immediately, walking the same worn paths he always walked. The monks were angry. "You scared him! You could have hurt him!" "I showed him he could fly," Osho replied calmly, "but he chose to land. That choice tells me something important. Your crane is imprisoned not by bamboo walls, but by comfort. He could leave any time, but he won't, because the enclosure has become more familiar than freedom." He looked at the monks gathered around him. And before you judge Haku too harshly, ask yourselves, how are you different? How many of you are living in comfortable enclosures of your own making, never attempting to fly because the familiar is safer than the possible? One young monk, named Botan, was particularly struck by this question. He realized he had been at the temple for 5 years, had taken preliminary vows, but had never fully committed to the monastic life. He was comfortable in this in-between state, receiving the structure and security of monastery life without the full commitment it demanded. Like Haku, he had wings he never used. After Osho left, Botan couldn't stop thinking about the crane. He began to see Haku differently, not as a bird being kept safe, but as a bird being kept comfortable in a cage he could leave any time. And he began to see himself the same way. He started paying attention to all the ways the monastery had become his comfortable enclosure. He knew when every meal would come. He knew exactly what each day would bring. He had routines that felt safe, relationships that felt predictable, a life that felt controlled. And he realized this comfort was preventing him from attempting the flight that monastic life was actually meant to enable. The leap into full commitment, into genuine spiritual practice, into the risk and uncertainty that real transformation requires. "I've been living like Haku," Botan confessed to the abbot. "Safe and comfortable, but not really alive. Not really practicing, just walking the same familiar paths day after day." The abbot, who'd been troubled by Osho's words about the crane, nodded. "You're not alone." Many of us have made the monastery into a comfortable cage rather than a launching place. We've mistaken security for wisdom, routine for practice, comfort for peace. He gestured toward Haku's enclosure. The priest was right to startle the crane into flight, not to frighten him, but to remind him what his wings were for. Perhaps we all need to be startled sometimes, reminded that we have wings we're not using, capabilities we're not exercising, flights we're not attempting, because the ground feels safer. The monks began to look at their own lives with new eyes. They noticed patterns of comfortable avoidance, ways they stayed safely within self-imposed limits, flights they could attempt but didn't. The monastery, meant to be a place of transformation, had become for many a place of comfortable stagnation. Gradually, changes began to happen. Monks who had been avoiding difficult practices began to attempt them. Commitments that had been postponed were made. Risks that had seemed too frightening were taken. Not everyone changed. Some preferred the comfortable enclosure, but many discovered they had wings they had forgotten about. As for Haku, the monks began to encourage him to fly, taking him to open areas and gently startling him into the air. At first, he would fly only briefly before landing back in familiar territory, but eventually, his flights grew longer. One day, Haku flew beyond the temple grounds entirely and didn't return. The monks felt both loss and joy. They had loved having Haku, but they recognized that keeping him comfortable had been keeping him caged. Setting him free, truly free, not just free within limits, was the compassionate thing, even though it meant losing him. Botan, watching Haku disappear into the distance, felt inspired. If a crane can remember how to fly after 3 years of comfortable captivity, then surely I can remember what I came here to do. I've been in my bamboo enclosure long enough. He took his final vows that week, fully committing to monastic life. It was terrifying in a way his comfortable half-commitment had never been. But it was also exhilarating, like stretching wings he had forgotten he possessed. Years later, when Botan had become a teacher, he would often tell the story of Haku the crane. "We all build comfortable enclosures," he would say. "Relationships that feel safe but limit growth. Jobs that provide security but prevent exploration. Routines that feel comforting but cage us. The bamboo walls look like protection, but they're actually prevention, preventing us from discovering what we're capable of, from attempting flights we were made for." Students would ask, "But how do we know when comfort has become a cage?" When should we leave the enclosure? When you're walking the same paths day after day without growth, Botan would reply. When you've stopped even looking at the sky. When you've forgotten you have wings. When the thought of flying fills you with fear rather than excitement. These are signs that comfort has become captivity, that the safe enclosure has become a prison you don't recognize as a prison because it's comfortable. He would pause, then add, "The tragedy isn't being in the enclosure. The tragedy is forgetting you can leave, forgetting you were made for flight, forgetting that your wings have purpose beyond stretching." Haku lived 3 years in comfortable captivity before someone reminded him he could fly. How many years will you live in yours before you remember? Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own bamboo enclosure. What comfortable cage have you built for yourself? What safe patterns have you established that prevent growth? What flights are you not attempting because staying grounded feels safer? You have wings. You've always had wings. The question isn't whether you're capable of flight. You are. The question is whether you've become so comfortable with the ground that you've forgotten that the sky is where you belong. Whether the bamboo enclosure feels so safe that you've stopped noticing it's still an enclosure. Rest tonight with this awareness. Tomorrow, you could fly. You could attempt something that terrifies you. You could leave the comfortable patterns and risk the unknown. You could stretch your wings, not just as exercise, but as preparation for actual flight. The cage isn't locked. It never was. You've just been comfortable enough that you forgot to try the door. Sleep now and dream of flying. Let some part of you remember what your wings are for. And when you wake, maybe, just maybe, you'll be ready to find out what happens when you actually use them. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. In a monastery nestled between 2 mountains, there lived a young monk named Koji who took his responsibilities with tremendous seriousness. Each morning before dawn, he was assigned the task of sweeping the courtyard, and he approached this simple chore as if the monastery's very survival depended on it. Koji would begin his work with fierce determination, moving in perfectly straight lines from one end of the courtyard to the other. His broom strokes were methodical, precise, leaving no stone unswept. He would work for hours, his jaw clenched with concentration, his movements sharp and controlled. But the courtyard sat beneath an ancient cherry tree, and the tree had its own ideas about cleanliness. Even as Koji swept, new leaves would drift down, landing exactly where he had just cleaned. The wind would scatter dust across his perfectly swept paths. Birds would drop small twigs and seeds onto the stones. Each new bit of debris felt like a personal insult to Koji. He would rush to sweep it up, only to see 3 more leaves fall behind him. His sweeping became more frantic, more desperate. He began waking earlier and earlier, trying to finish before the wind picked up, before the birds became active, before new leaves could fall. The other monks noticed Koji's growing exhaustion. They saw the tension in his shoulders, the frustration etched across his young face. But they said nothing. This was between Koji and his teacher, Master Tenzin. Master Tenzin had been watching his student struggle for several weeks. He saw how Koji was making himself miserable over a courtyard that would never stay perfectly clean. could never stay perfectly clean, was not meant to stay perfectly clean. One morning, as Koji was finishing his 3rd hour of sweeping, his movements now mechanical and joyless, Master Tenzen appeared beside him. "Why do you sweep in straight lines?" the master asked, his voice mild, curious. Koji stopped, surprised by the question. "Because that's the most efficient way to cover the ground, master. Straight lines ensure I don't miss any area." "I see," Tenzen nodded thoughtfully. "And how is that working for you?" Koji wanted to say it was working fine, but honesty prevented him. "I can never seem to finish, master. As soon as I clean one section, another becomes dirty. The courtyard is never completely perfect." Tenzen made a small sound that might have been agreement or might have been something else entirely. "Today, try something different. Sweep in circles instead." "Circles?" Koji couldn't hide his confusion. "But that's inefficient. Circles will overlap. I'll sweep the same areas multiple times. It doesn't make sense." "Try it anyway," Tenzen said gently. "Just for today. Sweep in circles and see what happens." Koji wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the logical reasons why circular sweeping was inferior to his systematic approach. But one did not argue with Master Tenzen. So he adjusted his grip on the broom and began to sweep in a large, slow circle. At first it felt wrong. His mind kept trying to straighten his path, to make it more efficient, more logical. But he continued, one circular sweep after another, round and round the courtyard. Something unexpected began to happen. Without the pressure to move in straight lines, to cover ground efficiently, to finish a measurable task, Koji's body started to relax. The circular motion became almost meditative, like a moving meditation. He noticed things he had missed during weeks of intense, focused sweeping. The way morning light caught the edges of wet stones, the sound his broom made, a soft whisper against the ground, the coolness of the air before the sun rose fully, the scent of cherry blossoms from the tree above. When a leaf fell in front of him, he swept it into his circle naturally. It became part of the dance rather than an interruption to his task. When the wind scattered dust behind him, he simply came round to it again on his next pass, unhurried, untroubled. After an hour of circular sweeping, Koji stopped and looked around. The courtyard wasn't perfectly clean. It couldn't be, but it was clean enough. It was cared for. And most surprisingly, Koji himself felt peaceful for the first time in weeks. Master Tenzen returned, as if he had known exactly when Koji would understand. "Well?" the master asked. "I don't understand," Koji admitted. "The courtyard isn't any cleaner than when I swept in straight lines. In fact, by logical measurement, it might be less clean, but somehow it feels right." "What changed?" Tenzen asked. Koji thought carefully. "I stopped trying to finish. Circles have no end point, so I couldn't race toward completion. I was just sweeping. Being present with the broom, the stones, the leaves. The work itself became the point, not the finished product. And I realized the courtyard was never meant to be perfectly clean. It's outside, under a tree, in the world. Leaves will fall, wind will blow. This is natural, this is right. I was fighting against nature itself, trying to impose a perfection that doesn't exist." Tenzen smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to light up from somewhere deep inside. "For weeks, you've been at war with this courtyard, at war with leaves. at war with wind, at war with imperfection. How did that feel? Exhausting, Master. I was miserable. And now? Koji looked down at his broom, at the courtyard with its scattered leaves and imperfect stones. Now I understand that I'm not here to create perfection. I'm here to care for something that will never be perfect. And that's okay. That's actually the point. From that day forward, Koji swept in circles. Other monks noticed the change in him. Where once he had been tight and tense, now he seemed relaxed. Where once his sweeping had been grim duty, now it seemed almost like a dance. Students would sometimes ask him, "Isn't circular sweeping inefficient?" And Koji would smile and reply, "It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to achieve perfect cleanliness, then yes, it's inefficient. You'll fail either way, but you'll be miserable failing. If you're trying to be present, to care for something without attachment to perfect outcomes, then circles are the most efficient path of all." Years later, when Koji became a teacher himself, he would always observe how new students approached their tasks. When he saw someone fighting against imperfection, making themselves miserable in pursuit of an impossible standard, he would suggest they try moving in circles for a while. Perfection is a straight line that doesn't exist, he would tell them. But presence, care, acceptance, these are circles that spiral deeper and deeper into understanding. Don't fight against the nature of things. Work with it. Dance with it. Sweep in circles until you understand that the imperfect is already perfect, exactly as it is. As you rest tonight, you might consider this teaching. Where in your life are you sweeping in rigid straight lines, exhausting yourself trying to achieve a perfection that doesn't exist? What would happen if you moved in circles instead? If you let go of the end point and simply engaged fully with the present moment, imperfection and all. The courtyard of your life will never be perfectly clean. Leaves will fall. Wind will blow. This is not failure. This is life. And when you stop fighting against it, when you sweep in circles with presence and care, you might discover that what you thought was imperfect was actually complete all along. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.